Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It was one of those perfect Colorado summer days, the kind that makes you forget about everything else. The sky was this impossible shade of blue, not a single cloud, and the air had that clean, piney smell that just fills you up. My wife and I had decided to get out of the city, just a spontaneous day trip. We'd been married for 3 years at that point, and we loved these little adventures. We packed a cooler with some sandwiches and sodas, grabbed our gear, and just started driving. This was back in July of '97. We were in our old Jeep Cherokee, the green one that was always making some new noise, but never actually broke down. We'd turned off the main highway onto this network of logging roads that crisscrossed the area between Big Lake and Rock Lake. The road was rough, just dirt and gravel, and it was slow going, but that was the whole point. To get away from the paved world. We came around a bend, and there was this overlook. It wasn't an official scenic point or anything, just a wide spot in the road where the trees pulled back and the whole valley opened up below you. It was too beautiful not to stop. I pulled the Jeep over, the tires crunching on the gravel, and we just sat for a minute with the engine off. The silence was immediate and total. No wind, no birds, just this heavy, warm quiet. I had my binoculars with me, a decent pair of Bushnells I used for bird watching. I got out of the car, the metal door groaning when I opened it. My wife stayed in the passenger seat, leaning back with her eyes closed, just soaking in the sun. I remember the heat of the sun on my arms, the rough texture of the Jeep's paint under my hand as I leaned against the hood. I lifted the binoculars and started glassing the valley, just slowly scanning, looking for movement, for anything interesting. The valley was dense with pine and aspen, and a creek, the Lake Fork, cut a silvery line through the middle of it all. I could see a trail snaking along near the water, and that's when I saw them. 3 people, hikers. They were tiny from this distance, just little colorful dots moving slowly along the trail. One had a red backpack. I remember that clearly. They were maybe a quarter-mile away, just ambling along, completely unaware of me watching them from way up here. I kept scanning, following the trail ahead of them, and that's when I saw it. About 500 yards ahead of the hikers, there was a meadow, a break in the trees, and something was moving through it. Something big. My brain, in that first split second, tried to file it under bear. It was the obvious thing, but it was wrong. The shape was all wrong. It was dark, almost black, and it was moving on 2 legs, upright, and it was huge. I mean, just impossibly, terrifyingly huge. I remember my breath catching in my throat, a little involuntary gasp that made my wife open her eyes and look over at me. "What is it?" she asked. I just shook my head, my hands tightening on the binoculars. I couldn't look away. I had to be sure. It wasn't a bear. A bear, even on its hind legs, has a certain shape, a slope to its back, a different proportion. This thing was built like a man, but a man scaled up to a nightmare size. Its shoulders were massively broad, and it had this powerful, fluid stride. It was moving fast, really fast, cutting across the meadow at an angle. It wasn't loping or shuffling. It was moving with purpose, like it was trying to get somewhere. And then I realized what it was doing. It had seen the hikers, or heard them. It was moving away from them. It was startled. The sheer speed of it was what chilled me the most. It covered the open ground in seconds, its long arms swinging. It reached the tree line at the edge of the meadow and just vanished. It didn't crash through the undergrowth. It didn't make a sound. 1 second it was there, this colossal dark figure silhouetted against the bright green of the meadow, and the next, it was just gone, swallowed by the forest without a single snap of a twig. I lowered the binoculars. My hands were shaking. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it was trying to get out. I felt cold all over, despite the heat. "What did you see?" my wife asked again, her voice tighter now, picking up on my fear. I just handed her the binoculars and pointed, my finger trembling. "There, in that meadow, look." She fumbled with them for a second, then put them to her eyes. She scanned the area, back and forth. "I don't see anything, just the hikers." "It's gone," I said, and my voice sounded strange, thin. It crossed the meadow and went into the trees. "What was it?" she asked, lowering the glasses and looking at me, her face full of concern and confusion. I didn't want to say it. It sounded insane, even in my own head. I don't know. It was big, really big, and it was running on 2 legs. We stood there for a few more minutes, me trying to describe what I'd seen, her trying to see it for herself. But it was gone. The meadow was empty and still. The 3 hikers kept walking, completely oblivious, their little red backpack bobbing along. They had no idea what had been just a few hundred yards in front of them. A part of me, the logical part, was screaming that I'd made a mistake, a trick of the light, a weird shadow. But I knew, deep in my gut, that I hadn't. The conditions were perfect. The light was brilliant. I'd had a clear, unobstructed view for a solid 5 minutes. I saw the way its muscles moved under that dark hair. I saw the sheer power in its stride. I saw it cross the entire meadow and disappear. It was real. "We have to go down there," I heard myself say. My wife looked at me like I was crazy. "Down there? Why?" "I have to see. I have to know." It was a compulsion. I couldn't just get back in the car and drive home. The image of that thing was burned into my mind. The terror of its size, the awe of its speed. It was a mixture of feelings I'd never felt before. Primal fear mixed with this staggering sense of having witnessed something I was never meant to see. She was hesitant, I could tell. She was scared. But she saw the look on my face, the absolute certainty, and she finally nodded. "Okay, but we be careful." We got back in the Jeep. The inside was like an oven now, the steering wheel almost too hot to touch. I started the engine, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence, and pulled back onto the logging road. We started winding our way down, the road switchbacking into the valley. The trip down felt like it took forever. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Every shadow between the trees looked like movement. Every time a branch scraped against the side of the Jeep, I jumped. We finally found a place to pull off, near where I guessed the trailhead was. The air down here was different, cooler, damper. It smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves. The sound of the creek was louder, a constant rushing noise that filled the space. We got out. I remember the feeling of the gravel under my boots, the way the sound of the car doors closing seemed to get absorbed by the trees. We started walking along the trail, the same one the hikers had been on. The forest was dense, the canopy so thick it felt like twilight. It was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no squirrels chattering. Just the sound of the creek and our own footsteps. My wife stayed close to me, her hand finding mine. Her palm was sweaty. We walked for what felt like a long time, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. We were looking for the meadow. I was trying to match the landscape I'd seen from above with what was on the ground. It was harder than I thought. Everything looks different from a bird's eye view. Finally, we found it. A break in the trees. The meadow. It was smaller than it had looked from the overlook, but it was the same place. The grass was tall, up to my waist in some spots. We stood at the edge, where the thing had vanished into the trees. We didn't go in. We just stood there, looking. "Do you see anything?" my wife whispered, as if speaking too loud would summon it. I shook my head. I was looking for footprints, for broken branches, for any sign at all. But there was nothing. The grass in the meadow was swaying gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. It showed no path, no trail of passage. We walked along the tree line, our eyes scanning the ground. The soil was soft and loamy, perfect for holding a track. If something that big had run through here, it would have left a mark. It had to, and then I saw it. It wasn't a clear, defined footprint. It was more of a depression, a deep impression in the soft earth right at the edge of the tree line. It was long, really long, and it was wide. I knelt down, my heart in my throat. My wife knelt beside me. "What is that?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just looked. It wasn't a boot print, it wasn't a bear track. It was just a huge, vague impression. But at one end, where the toes would be, I could see something, a pattern. It was hard to make out, but it looked like there were 4 smaller depressions, and then a much larger, deeper one off to the side, like a thumb, a big toe. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I looked from the impression into the dark wall of trees. The forest was a tangle of shadows. It felt like it was watching us. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, menacing. It was the silence of something holding its breath. We didn't have a camera. We didn't have any plaster to make a cast. We just had our eyes and this creeping, skin-crawling feeling that we were not alone. "We should go," my wife said, her voice barely a whisper. She was pulling on my arm. "Please, let's go." I wanted to argue. I wanted to push into those trees, to follow that invisible trail, to find some other piece of proof. But the fear was too much. It was a physical weight on my chest. The air felt thick and hard to breathe. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there, to run back to the car, to get back to the world of paved roads and other people. I stood up, my legs feeling weak. I took one last look at that impression in the dirt, memorizing it, and then I let my wife pull me away. We walked back down the trail, and this time we weren't walking, we were almost jogging. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that dark, massive shape standing at the edge of the trees, watching us go. We didn't see it. We didn't hear anything. We just felt it. This overwhelming, oppressive feeling of being observed by something ancient and powerful and utterly alien. We reached the Jeep, fumbled with the doors, and scrambled inside. I locked the doors, a ridiculous, futile gesture, but it made me feel a tiny bit better. I started the engine and slammed the Jeep into gear, spinning the tires on the gravel as I pulled back onto the road. I drove faster than I should have on those rough roads, the Jeep bouncing and jolting. But I didn't care. I just wanted to get out, to put distance between us and that valley. We didn't talk much on the drive home. What was there to say? I had seen something that wasn't supposed to exist. And it had seen me, or at least it knew I was there. The clarity of that sighting under those perfect conditions left no room for doubt in my mind. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit. It was Bigfoot. The word felt silly, childish, but there was no other word for it. The terror of its size and speed has never left me. It's been years, but I can still close my eyes and see it moving across that meadow, its powerful body cutting through the tall grass without a sound. I can still feel that cold dread that settled in my bones when I looked into those dark, impenetrable woods. We never went back to that particular overlook. I don't think I could. Sometimes, on a quiet night, I'll think about it. I'll wonder what it was doing there. I'll wonder if it was as scared of me as I was of it. And I'll remember that deep, silent impression in the dirt, the only physical proof that any of it ever happened. And I'll get this chill that has nothing to do with the temperature. It's the chill of knowing that there are still things in this world that we don't understand. Things that live in the deep, dark places just beyond the edge of the light. And sometimes they cross over into our world, if only for a minute, to remind us that we're not as alone as we think we are. Story 2. Okay, so I've never posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for weeks now. I still can't sleep right, and every time I close my eyes, I hear that sound again. This happened about a month ago on a Saturday. My wife and I decided to take the kids out for a hike near Lake Cushman. We live not too far from there, close to Castle Rock, and we've done the Big Creek Trail a bunch of times. It's usually pretty peaceful, just a nice, easy walk through the woods, good for the family. Our son is 8 and our daughter is 6, so we stick to trails that aren't too rough. That day the weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot, with a cool breeze coming off the lake. We packed some snacks, water, and headed out around 10 in the morning. The trail starts off winding through this dense forest, with tall pines and firs blocking out most of the sun. It's quiet in a way that's almost eerie, but in a good way, you know? Like you can hear your own footsteps crunching on the pine needles, and the kids were laughing and pointing at squirrels. My wife was holding our daughter's hand, and I had our son by my side. We were just chatting about nothing, school, work, the usual stuff. The air smelled clean, like damp earth and pine resin, and everything felt normal. I remember thinking how lucky we were to have this kind of place so close to home. We'd been walking for maybe an hour when things started to feel off. It wasn't anything big at first, just little things. The birds stopped chirping. I didn't notice it right away, but my wife pointed it out. She said, "Hey, it's gotten quiet all of a sudden," and she was right. No birds, no squirrels rustling, just this heavy silence. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe a hawk was nearby or something, but then the air changed. It got colder, like a chill had settled in, even though the sun was still out. I felt a shiver run down my back, and I pulled my jacket tighter. The kids didn't seem to notice, though. They were still skipping ahead, so I tried to act normal. Then came the rumble. It wasn't loud at first, more like a low vibration that I felt through my feet before I heard it. It started deep, like something massive was moving underground. I stopped walking and put a hand on my son's shoulder to steady myself. My wife looked at me, her eyes wide. "Did you feel that?" she whispered. I nodded, and we both stood there, listening. The rumble grew, turning into this groaning sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was low and guttural, like rocks grinding together, but with this weird, almost human quality to it. I could feel it in my chest, like when you're near a big speaker at a concert, but this was way more intense. The kids froze, and my daughter clutched my wife's leg. "Daddy, what's that?" my son asked, his voice trembling. Before I could answer, the howl started. Oh God, that howl. It was like nothing I've ever heard. It began as a deep roar that built into this high-pitched shriek, then dropped back into a moan that seemed to vibrate through the trees. It lasted for what felt like forever, probably only 10 seconds or so, but it felt longer. The sound was so powerful that it made my ears ring, and I could feel the ground shaking under my feet. It wasn't like a bear or a coyote. I've heard those before, and this was different. It had this ancient primal edge to it, like something from a nightmare. My wife, who's usually calm in the woods, looked pale, and she pulled the kids closer. "We need to go," she said, her voice shaky. But then the stench hit us. It was this overwhelming smell of rot and something else, like old meat mixed with wet dog and a chemical tang that made my eyes water. It came out of nowhere, so strong that I gagged. The kids started crying, and my son buried his face in my side. "It smells bad, Dad," he sobbed. "I've been camping and hiking my whole life, and I've never smelled anything like that." It wasn't just animal, it was foul, like death and decay, but with this weird sweetness that made it even worse. The air felt thick with it, and I could taste it in the back of my throat. My wife covered her nose with her sleeve, and I did the same, but it didn't help much. We stood there for a minute, too scared to move. The howl had stopped, but the silence that followed was even more terrifying. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, and my hands were shaking. I kept looking around, trying to see where the sound and smell were coming from, but the trees were too thick. Everything looked normal, just the same old trail, but it felt wrong, like we were being watched. The kids were clinging to us, and my daughter was whispering, "I want to go home." I nodded and whispered back, "We're going, sweetie, just stay close." We started walking back the way we came, but we were moving slowly because the kids were scared and stumbling. My wife was in front, holding our daughter's hand, and I was behind with our son. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something chasing us. The stench was still there, lingering in the air, and every now and then I'd hear a twig snap or a rustle in the bushes. Each time I'd freeze, but I never saw anything. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what it could be. A bear. But bears don't sound like that, and they don't smell that bad unless they're dead. And why would a dead bear be moving? It didn't make sense. After about 5 minutes of walking, we came to a small clearing where we'd stopped earlier to rest. That's when we saw it. On the ground, near a fallen log, there was a patch of mushrooms, the kind with big white caps that grow in clusters. But these weren't just growing. They looked like they'd been ripped out of the ground. The soil was torn up, and the mushrooms were scattered around, some of them crushed. It was weird because they were fresh, no bugs or rot on them, but they'd been pulled out violently, like something had yanked them up in a hurry. I knelt down to look, and that's when I noticed the footprints. Not human footprints. These were huge, like twice the size of my boot, and deep, as if whatever made them was heavy. The toes were splayed out, and there was no shoe pattern, just bare impressions in the mud. My wife saw them too, and she grabbed my arm. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. I shook my head. I had no idea. The kids were too scared to look, so I told them to stay back. I reached out and picked up one of the mushrooms. It felt cool and damp in my hand, and I could see where it had been torn from the stem. I don't know why I took it. Maybe as proof, or just because I needed to do something, anything, to make sense of this. I shoved it in my pocket, and we kept moving. The rest of the hike back was a blur. We didn't talk much, just hurried along the trail. With me constantly looking behind us, the stench faded after a while, and the birds started chirping again, like nothing had happened. But the fear stayed with us. When we finally got to the car, I felt this huge relief, but also this dread because I knew we'd have to drive home and try to act normal for the kids. In the car, my wife and I just exchanged looks. We didn't need to say anything. The kids fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the scare. Once we got home, I took the mushroom out of my pocket and put it in a plastic bag. It's still in my garage now, sitting on a shelf. I've thought about showing it to someone, but who would believe us? We didn't see anything, just heard that sound, smelled that stench, and saw those footprints. I've tried to research it online, and I've come across stories about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but I've always been skeptical. Now, though, I'm not so sure. That sound, that smell, it wasn't anything natural, at least not anything I know. My wife's a rational person, and even she can't explain it. We've talked about it a few times since then, but we always end up just shaking our heads. The kids have had nightmares, and I've been waking up in the middle of the night, sweating, thinking I hear that howl again. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will. But that day on the Big Creek Trail, something was out there with us. Something old and powerful and terrifying. And every time I think about it, I get this cold feeling in my stomach, like I'm back in those woods, waiting for it to happen again. Story 3. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out. I'm a Marine vet, did 2 tours overseas, seen some shit that still messes with my head. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened that morning in Jasper County. It was opening day of rifle season last November, and I'd been looking forward to it for months. Hunting's my way of decompressing, you know? After everything, being out in the woods alone, just me and the silence, it's like therapy. But that day screwed me up bad. I woke up around 4 in the morning, way before sunrise. The air was cold and damp, the kind that seeps into your bones even through layers. I'd packed my gear the night before. My rifle, a Remington 700, some snacks, water, and my binoculars. I've always been careful, methodical. Marine training sticks with you. I drove out to my usual spot, deep in the Sam Houston National Forest, off one of the old logging roads. It's thick out there, real East Texas piney woods, with tall pines and oaks, underbrush so dense you can't see 10 feet in some places. I've hunted there for years, never had a problem beyond the usual squirrels or the occasional coyote. I got to my stand a little before 6, just as the sky was starting to lighten from black to grey. Climbed up, settled in, and waited. The woods were quiet at first, the way they are in the early hours. Just the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird now and then. I remember feeling calm, focused, my breath fogged in the air, and I kept my rifle across my lap, finger off the trigger, safety on, standard stuff. I was scanning the area, looking for movement, when I heard the first sound. It came from my left, a medium-pitched howl that didn't sound like any animal I knew, not a coyote. Those are higher, more yippy. This was deeper, almost melodic, but with a rough edge to it. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I froze, listening hard. Then, from my right, another call, lower this time, like a response. It was eerie, how they seemed to be talking to each other. I've heard owls and bobcats, but this was different. It felt coordinated. My heart started beating faster, and I tightened my grip on the rifle. Instinct kicked in. I've been in situations where things go sideways fast, and my training always says, assess the threat. But here I couldn't see anything, just trees and shadows. I waited a minute or two, trying to pinpoint where the sounds came from. Nothing moved. The woods had gone dead silent, like everything was holding its breath. That's when I decided to get my binoculars. I keep them in my pack and I fumbled for them, my hands a little shaky. As I lifted them to my eyes, scanning the area to the left where the first howl came from, that's when it happened. A voice, deep, garbled, like it was coming from someone with a throat full of gravel, said, "Hey, you!" I dropped the binoculars. My whole body went cold, like I'd been dunked in ice water. Chills shot down my spine, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't a shout or a yell. It was conversational, like someone trying to get my attention. But the tone was wrong. Distorted, almost electronic, but not quite human-like, but not human. I've heard voices in combat, screams, orders, but this was something else. It came from straight ahead, right in the middle of where I was looking. But there was nothing there, just more trees. The silence that followed was heavier than any I've ever felt. No birds, no wind, nothing. It was like the woods had been vacuum sealed. I stayed frozen in my stand, rifle still in my lap, but my hands were sweating. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I was being watched from all sides. My mind raced. Was it a person messing with me? But who'd be out here at this hour, and why? And that voice. It didn't sound like a prank. It felt ancient, predatory. I've been in firefights where I knew someone was aiming at me, but this was worse. This was unseen, unknown. I slowly picked up the binoculars again, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I scanned the area, left to right, up and down. Nothing. The trees stood still, the underbrush undisturbed. But the feeling of being watched intensified. It was a physical pressure, like eyes drilling into me. I started noticing little things, a broken branch here, a patch of mud that looked disturbed, but nothing conclusive. My training told me to stay put, observe, but every fiber of me wanted to run. I've never been one to spook easily, but this had me rattled. Time dragged on. Maybe 10 minutes passed, though it felt like hours. I kept my rifle ready, safety off now, finger near the trigger. I was breathing shallow, trying to be quiet, but my ears were straining for any sound. Then, from the left again, that medium-pitched howl, closer this time. It was followed almost immediately by the lower call from the right, and they seemed to be moving, circling me. My stomach tightened. This wasn't random. It felt intelligent, like they were communicating, maybe herding me. I thought of Bigfoot stories I'd heard, vets talking about weird encounters in the woods, but I always brushed them off as tall tales. Now I wasn't so sure. I decided I had to move. Staying in the stand felt like being a target. I climbed down slowly, my boots scraping against the wood, every sound amplified in the silence. Once on the ground, I crouched, rifle-shouldered, scanning the area. The woods were dim, with patches of mist hanging low. I started walking back toward my truck, maybe a half-mile away, keeping to a slow, steady pace. I've done patrols in worse conditions, but this was different. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept hearing faint sounds, a crunch to my left, a snap to my right. But when I looked, nothing was there. About halfway to the truck, I stopped to listen. That's when I heard it again, the garbled voice, this time from behind me. It didn't say words this time, just a low grumble, like a growl with syllables. I spun around, rifle up, but saw nothing. My hands were trembling now, and I had to force myself to breathe. I remembered stories from other hunters about feeling watched, about sounds that shouldn't be there, but hearing it firsthand, it's indescribable. It's not just fear, it's a deep, primal dread, like your brain knows something's wrong but can't process it. I picked up the pace, jogging now, my pack bouncing on my back. The woods seemed to close in around me, the trees feeling like they were leaning in. I've been in dense jungles overseas, but this was familiar territory turned alien. I kept expecting to see something, a shape, a figure, but there was nothing, just that oppressive silence and the occasional sound that kept me on edge. My mind kept replaying that voice. Hey, you! Who was it talking to? Me? Why? The intelligence behind it chilled me more than the sound itself. It wasn't mindless. It was deliberate. When I finally reached my truck, I was sweating despite the cold. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I dropped them twice. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a minute, breathing hard. The woods looked normal from here, peaceful even, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching. I started the engine and drove off, not even bothering to secure my gear properly. I didn't look back. I drove straight home, didn't stop for anything. The whole way, my mind was racing. What the hell was that? A person? An animal? But that voice, it was too clear, too human-like, yet not. I've heard bears make noises, but nothing like that. When I got home, I dumped my gear and just sat on the couch, staring at the wall. I couldn't focus on anything. I tried to tell myself it was a prank or my imagination, but I know what I heard. I'm a trained observer. I don't hallucinate under stress. I didn't go back to that spot for the rest of the season. Hell, I haven't been back since. Every time I think about it, that chill comes back. I've talked to a few buddies about it, other vets who hunt, and some said they've heard similar things, howls that don't match any animal, feelings of being watched, but no one's ever mentioned a voice. That's what gets me. The intelligent communication, like it knew I was there and was trying to engage. I've spent nights lying awake, going over it in my head, but I can't explain it. It's just there, this gap in my understanding of the world, and it scares me more than any firefight ever did. I still hunt, but I stick to more open areas now, places where I can see for miles. That day in Jasper County, it changed something in me. I don't feel as safe in the woods anymore. And that voice, those words, hey you, they echo in my dreams sometimes. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will. But I know one thing. I'm not going back there alone, ever. Story 4. We'd planned this canoe trip for months. Lake Vermilion is massive, with all these islands and inlets, and we wanted to get away from the crowded spots. We picked a remote island that looked good on the map. No trails, no nothing, just pure wilderness. We packed our gear, Tents, fishing rods, enough food for a weekend, the usual. The weather was perfect when we set out that morning, sunny but not too hot, with a light breeze that made the water ripple nicely. We paddled for a couple of hours, taking our time, enjoying the silence broken only by the dip of our paddles and the occasional loon call. It felt good, like we were the only people in the world. We reached the island around midday. It was smaller than I expected, maybe a couple 100 yards across, covered in dense pine and birch trees with a rocky shoreline that made for a tricky landing. We dragged the canoe up onto a patch of mossy ground and scouted for a campsite. Found a flat spot near the trees, not too close to the water, where we could set up the tent and have a fire pit. We spent the afternoon gathering firewood, setting up the tent, and just relaxing. I remember the smell of pine needles and damp earth, the way the sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows. We fished a bit off the shore, caught a couple of smallmouth bass for dinner, and cooked them over the fire as the sun went down. Everything was peaceful, the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. We joked around, talked about work, life, the usual stuff, and turned in for the night when it got dark, probably around 10 o'clock. I fell asleep pretty fast, tired from the paddling and the fresh air. The first part of the night was dead quiet, the kind of silence you only get way out in the wild. But then, something woke me up. I glanced at my watch. It was 1:30 in the morning. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a beaver or something splashing in the water. But then I heard it, this muffled, chattering sound coming from across the lake. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. It had a rhythm to it, almost like speech, but not any language I could make out. The tones rose and fell, sometimes low and guttural, other times higher, almost like someone trying to whisper but not knowing how. It didn't sound human, but it wasn't random noise either. It felt intentional. I lay there in my sleeping bag, heart starting to pound, just listening. It went on for what felt like 10 minutes, then it stopped as suddenly as it started. The silence that followed was heavier, more oppressive. I told myself it was probably just some weird bird or a frog, something natural, and I managed to drift back to sleep, though it was fitful. Then, at 3 o'clock in the morning, my friend shook me awake. His hand was trembling and his voice was a harsh whisper. "Dude, wake up. Listen." I was groggy, disoriented, but the fear in his voice snapped me to attention, and then I heard it again. The same chattering, but this time it was closer, much closer. It was coming from the forest behind our tent, not across the lake anymore. My stomach dropped. We both froze, lying there in the dark, just listening. The sounds were more distinct now, rhythmic, like two voices overlapping, one deep and rumbling, the other higher and faster, almost chittering. It didn't sound like any animal call I'd ever heard in my life. We've heard coyotes, bears, owls. This was different. It felt intelligent, like a conversation, but twisted and alien. My friend fumbled for the flashlight we kept by the tent door. His breathing was ragged, and I could feel my own heart hammering against my ribs. The chattering kept going, rising in intensity, and then we started hearing other sounds, deep, guttural grunts that vibrated through the ground, and heavy, shuffling footsteps. Not the light patter of a deer or the scurry of a raccoon. This was heavy, like something big moving through the underbrush, snapping branches as it went. The air grew cold, and I could smell this musky, earthy scent drifting into the tent, like wet fur and decay. We decided we had to look. I don't know why. Maybe to confirm we weren't going crazy. My friend clicked on the flashlight, and we slowly unzipped the tent flap, peering out into the darkness. The beam of light cut through the trees, shaky because his hands were trembling so bad. At first we didn't see anything, just shadows and leaves. Then, for a split second, the light caught something. Two amber reflections, low to the ground but too high for a bear, and they glowed like hot coals. They were eyes, I'm sure of it, but huge, and they didn't blink. They just stared right at us. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt this primal fear, the kind that makes your hair stand on end. Behind those eyes we heard a loud crack, like a thick branch being snapped in half, and the grunting got louder, more aggressive. That's when we lost it. We didn't say a word, just scrambled out of the tent, leaving everything behind. Our sleeping bags, our packs, the fishing gear, all of it. We ran for the canoe, stumbling over roots and rocks in the dark. I remember the cold, wet moss under my bare feet, the sharp pain as I stepped on a twig, but I didn't care. All I could think was, we need to get on the water now. We shoved the canoe into the lake, water sloshing around our ankles, and climbed in, paddling like our lives depended on it. My arms burned with the effort, but adrenaline kept me going. We didn't look back, just paddled out into the open water, putting as much distance between us and that island as possible. Once we were about 50 yards out, we stopped, both of us panting, chests heaving. The night was pitch black, with only a sliver of moon reflecting on the water, and that's when we heard the voices again. They were still on the island, but now they were overlapping, circling our campsite. The deep voice rumbled like distant thunder, and the higher one chattered rapidly, like it was responding. It sounded like they were communicating, working together, and it sent shivers down my spine. We could hear more branches breaking, like they were tearing through our stuff. We just sat there in the canoe, drifting, too scared to make a sound. I kept expecting to see something swimming after us, but the water stayed calm. The voices eventually faded, but the silence that followed was worse, because we didn't know what was happening back on shore. We decided to paddle to another island, one we'd spotted earlier that was smaller and more exposed with fewer trees. It took us maybe 20 minutes to get there, and we beached the canoe on a rocky shore. We didn't set up camp or anything, just huddled together on the ground, wrapped in a spare blanket from the canoe, and waited for dawn. Every little sound made us jump. The lap of water, the rustle of leaves. I couldn't stop shaking, and my friend was the same. We didn't talk much, just sat there in silence, watching the sky slowly lighten. The sun rose around 5:30, casting a pale glow over the lake, and with the daylight, some of the fear eased, but not all of it. As soon as it was fully light, we paddled back to our original island. The place looked different in the morning sun, peaceful, almost mocking. We approached slowly, scanning the shoreline for any movement. When we landed, we could see our campsite was a mess. The tent was still standing, but things were scattered around. And then we saw the evidence. Several young saplings near the edge of the woods were bent over, not broken, but curved down like something heavy had been leaning on them. In the mossy ground, there were these large, oval depressions, about the size of dinner plates spaced a few feet apart. They looked like footprints, but too big and deep for any animal I know. The moss was pressed down, and in one spot, it was torn up, like something had been dragged. We packed up our gear as fast as we could, not saying much. The whole time, I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see those amber eyes again. We didn't stick around to fish or anything, just loaded the canoe and paddled back to the main shore. The trip back felt longer, and every noise from the forest made my skin crawl. When we got to the car, we drove straight to the nearest town and found a payphone to call a Bigfoot research group we'd heard about. They took our report seriously, asked a lot of questions, but we never heard back much after that. To this day, I can't explain what happened. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a person. It was something else. Those vocalizations, the way they sounded like a conversation, the intelligent movements. It haunts me. I still go camping, but I stick to populated areas now. Every time I'm in the woods, I listen for that chattering, and part of me is always waiting for it to start again. I don't know what was out there that night, but I know it was real, and I know it was aware of us, and that's the part that keeps me up at night. Story 5. It was the summer of 1983, and I was 15 years old. My mom had sent me, my identical twin brother and my younger sister to stay with our aunt in Huica, California, this tiny, dusty town in Siskiyou County. Honestly, it felt like the middle of nowhere, the kind of place where the biggest excitement was watching the corn grow. Our aunt's house was okay, but we were bored out of our minds, so we spent most evenings at the local elementary school grounds. It was the only place with enough open space and some lights to mess around after dark. That particular night, it was still really warm even though the sun had been down for a while. The air was thick and heavy, and you could hear crickets going crazy in the fields. I remember the smell, a mix of dry dirt, cut grass, and that weird metallic tinge from the chain-link fence that surrounded the school property. There were about 8 or 10 of us neighborhood kids there. We'd decided to play a big game of war, splitting into 2 teams. My brother was on the other team, which always made it more competitive. My team was defending the old schoolhouse, this squat brick building that looked like it hadn't been painted in 50 years. It must have been around 8 or 9 at night. The light was this weird, dim orange from the few security lamps perched on tall poles, casting long, dancing shadows everywhere. You couldn't see more than 20, 30 feet clearly before everything just melted into darkness. We were running around laughing, pretending to shoot each other with stick guns. I was crouched behind a big metal dumpster, trying to peer around the corner to see if my brother's team was advancing. My heart was thumping from the running, and my t-shirt was sticking to my back with sweat. That's when the shouting started. Not the playful yelling from our game, but this sharp, panicked kind of cry. It came from my brother's side of the field, near the line of pine trees that separated the school from the wild land leading up to the mountains. I froze, thinking it was part of the game at first. But then I saw my brother and 2 other kids from his team just stop dead in their tracks. They were all staring toward the trees, their bodies rigid. I squinted, trying to see what they were looking at. At first, I couldn't make out anything. Just shadows. Then the shadows moved, 3 of them. They detached themselves from the deeper darkness under the pines and stepped into the dim orange light. My brain couldn't process it at first. They were huge, I mean taller than any man I'd ever seen, and I'm not short. Well over 6 feet. The largest one had to be 7 feet easy. They were covered head to toe in this short, bristly-looking hair. In that light, it was hard to tell if it was dark brown or black. It wasn't shaggy like in the movies. It was tight to their bodies, like a thick fur. They walked with these long, purposeful strides, not like a person out for a stroll, but with a kind of powerful, ground-eating gait. They weren't running, but they were moving fast, heading straight for the chain-link fence that marked the edge of the school property. We all just watched, completely paralyzed. It was like time had slowed down to a crawl. The biggest one reached the fence first. It didn't even break its stride. It just put these massive, long-fingered hands on the top of the fence, which had to be 8 feet high. And in one fluid, terrifyingly strong motion, it just threw its whole body over. It was so fast and so effortless. It didn't climb, it vaulted. The other 2 didn't even bother. They just went around the end of the fence where it met the trees, like they knew the layout. That's when the spell broke. Someone on my team screamed, "Run!" And it was like a gunshot. We all turned and bolted. My only thought was to get to the gate on the other side of the schoolhouse that led back toward the houses. My legs felt like jelly, but I was pumping them as hard as I could. I could hear the frantic footsteps of the other kids around me and our ragged, scared breathing. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We scrambled through the gate, a chaotic mess of limbs and fear. Once we were on the other side, most of the kids just kept running, disappearing down the street toward their homes. But I stopped, leaning against the cool metal of the fence, trying to catch my breath. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. I was gulping air, my hands on my knees. I figured we were safe on this side. The gate was shut. I thought whatever those things were, they were still on the school side. I remember looking up, scanning the field. The orange lights made everything look sickly and surreal. That's when I saw two figures squatting on a small dirt mound about 50 feet away, inside the fence. My brain, still scrambled from the adrenaline and the run, tried to make sense of it. My younger sister had been hanging out with her boyfriend earlier. In my panic, I thought, oh, it's just them. They must have hidden there during the game. A weird sense of relief washed over me, mixed with annoyance. "Hey!" I yelled out, my voice shaky. "What are you guys doing? Didn't you see?" I trailed off. They didn't move. They were just hunched over, perfectly still. The way they were squatting was odd. It wasn't a comfortable human squat. It was a deep, balanced crouch, like a baseball catcher, but more primal. And then it happened. A third figure ran out from behind the schoolhouse. It came from my left, and it moved with a speed that I cannot properly describe. It wasn't a run, it was a blur, a rush of dark, powerful motion. In less than a second, it covered the ground between us and stopped dead, maybe 10, 12 feet in front of me, on the other side of the chain-link fence. I was frozen solid. I couldn't breathe, couldn't blink. I just stared. It was massive up close. The smell hit me first, a thick, heavy, musky odor, like a wet dog mixed with old manure and something else, something wild and rotten. It was so strong it made my eyes water. Its body was thick and powerfully built, with broad shoulders and long, heavily muscled arms that hung past its knees. The hair was matted in places, and I could see the powerful muscles moving underneath it. Its face. God, its face. It wasn't a gorilla, it wasn't a man. It was something else entirely. The brow was heavy, shadowing its eyes, which were deep-set and dark. I couldn't see any whites. They were just pools of blackness. The nose was flat, the mouth a firm line, and then it tilted its head, just a slight, curious angle to the side. It was studying me. I could feel its gaze like a physical weight. It wasn't a hostile look, not exactly. It was an intense, focused examination, like I was a strange insect it had never seen before. In that moment, I wasn't a person. I was just an object of curiosity for this thing. The terror that exploded in my chest was pure and absolute. It wasn't just fear. It was a complete system shutdown. My mind went white with panic. Every hair on my body stood up. A cold sweat instantly drenched my shirt. My bladder felt loose, and I had to clench every muscle in my body to keep control. The proximity was the worst part. I could see the individual strands of hair on its chest moving in the slight breeze. I could hear a low, almost subaudible rumble coming from it, like a far-off diesel engine. My mouth fell open, but no sound came out at first. Then a strangled, incoherent yell ripped from my throat. It wasn't a word. It was just a raw, guttural scream of pure, undiluted fear. A A-A-A-A-G-H exclamation mark. The second I made that sound, the creature flinched, its head straightened, and in that same instant all three of them moved. The two on the mound uncoiled from their crouch, and the one in front of me spun around. They didn't run away like a person would. They leaped. It was a bounding, powerful motion, covering incredible distance with each jump. They vanished into the tall weeds and scrub at the edge of the field, heading straight for the dark outline of the mountains. The sound of their movement was just a rapid rustling, and then nothing. Silence. They were gone as if they'd never been there. I just stood there, trembling violently. My whole body was shaking so bad my teeth were chattering. I could still smell that musky, rotten odor hanging in the air. I felt dizzy, my vision starting to tunnel. I sank to my knees right there in the grass, the dampness seeping through my jeans. That's when my brother found me. He came running up, his face pale and his eyes wide, with the same terror I was feeling. "You saw them too," he gasped, his voice cracking. I just nodded, unable to speak. "Those were Bigfoots," he whispered, and the way he said it with such certainty and horror made my stomach drop. I saw them come out of the trees. They were Bigfoots. Hearing him say the word made it real. It wasn't just a weird, scary thing anymore. It was a name, a legend, and it was true. That's when my legs completely gave out from under me. I fell forward, my hands catching me in the grass. The world went grey and fuzzy for a few seconds. I didn't pass out completely, but I blanked out, my mind just refusing to function. It was too much. When my senses came back, I was still on my hands and knees, and my brother was kneeling next to me, shaking my shoulder. My little sister and her boyfriend came running up then, both of them crying and asking what was going on. We all started talking at once, our voices high and frantic, comparing what we saw. My brother's team had seen them emerge from the trees. They'd seen the big one vault the fence. I told them about the one stopping right in front of me, the head tilt, the smell. We all agreed on the details, the height, the hair, the way they moved. A family of Sasquatches. That's what we decided it had to be. We didn't stay another second. We ran all the way back to my aunt's house, bursting through the door, breathless and crying. She thought we were just worked up from our game until she saw our faces, the pure, unadulterated fear. We tried to tell her, but the words came out in a jumbled mess. She didn't really believe us, of course. She said we'd probably just seen some bears or a group of tall, hairy, homeless men. But we knew. We knew what we saw. The rest of the summer, I was a wreck. I couldn't sleep. Every noise outside my window made me jolt awake, my heart pounding. I refused to go anywhere near that school or any wooded area after dark. The feeling of being studied by that thing never left me. That profound, instinctual fear is something I've carried with me my whole life. It's been decades, and I still get a chill down my spine if I smell something musky and wild, or if I see a strange shadow out of the corner of my eye. It validated something for me. It proved that the world is a lot bigger and a lot stranger than we think. That the folklore, the campfire stories, they can be terrifyingly, gut-wrenchingly real. And sometimes they come out of the shadows on a warm summer night, tilt their head, and look right at you. Story 6. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out. I'm a bear hunter. Been doing this for over 20 years, all over Alaska, mostly the Kenai Peninsula. I know these woods like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did. This happened back in May 2016, and I still get chills thinking about it. I was out on a solo hunt, way off the beaten path in this rugged area I've scouted before. It's dense, wet, and quiet. The kind of place where you can go days without seeing another soul. That day started like any other, but it turned into something I'll never forget. I woke up early, maybe around 5 in the morning, to a grey, overcast sky. The air was cool and damp, with that earthy smell of rain-soaked pine and moss. I packed my gear, my rifle, a .30-06 I've had for years, some ammo, a knife and enough food and water for the day. I didn't plan on being out past dark. I just wanted to check some trails for bear sign. I've taken down black bears before, plenty of them, and I know how they move, how they sound. But this was different. I drove my ATV out to the spot where I usually start, parked it near a creek, and headed in on foot. The ground was soft from recent rains, so my boots sank a little with each step. I remember the silence being heavier than usual. No birds chirping, no squirrels chattering, just the drip of water from the trees and the rustle of my own movement. I've been in quiet woods before, but this felt off. Like everything was holding its breath. I shook it off, thinking maybe a storm was coming or something. I'd been walking for a couple hours, following a game trail that cuts through thick brush and spruce trees. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, but it was still dim under the canopy. I was focused on looking for tracks or scat, my rifle slung over my shoulder when I first heard it. Not the usual snap of a branch or the shuffle of a deer. This was heavier, like something big was moving through the undergrowth. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart starting to pound. I figured it might be a moose or even a bear, so I eased my rifle off my shoulder and held it ready. Then I saw it. Through the trees, maybe 50 yards away, there was this dark figure. It was huge, way taller than any bear I've ever seen. It had to be over 9 feet tall, standing upright on 2 legs, and it was covered in what looked like soaked brown hair, matted and dripping. It moved smoothly, not like a bear that lumbers or a person that stumbles, but with this eerie grace. My mind raced. What the hell is that? I've heard stories, sure, but I never put stock in them. I'm a practical guy. I deal in what I can see and shoot. It turned its head and I swear it looked right at me. That's when it let out this deep chest-rattling roar. It wasn't like a bear's growl or a wolf's howl. It was lower, more guttural, and it vibrated through me. I felt it in my bones. Instinct kicked in, and I fired a warning shot into the air. I've done that with bears before. Usually they run off, but this thing didn't even flinch. Instead, it charged straight at me. I've never been so scared in my life. I dropped my pack, no time to think about it, and I ran. My legs felt like jelly, but I pushed through the brush, heading for a large spruce tree I'd noticed earlier. It was one of those old-growth trees with thick branches low to the ground. I scrambled up, my hands slipping on the wet bark, and I climbed as high as I could, maybe 15 feet up. I wedged myself between 2 branches, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear it coming, the heavy footsteps crunching through the undergrowth. It reached the tree in seconds. Up close, it was even bigger than I thought. The hair was dark and shaggy, and it smelled like wet dog and something else, something musky and wild. It circled the base of the tree, and then it slammed into the trunk. The whole tree shook so hard I thought I'd fall. I clung on, my fingers digging into the bark, and I could feel the vibrations running up my arms. It hit it again and again, each time with this tremendous force. I was shaking violently, my teeth rattling. Then it started making these sounds, low rhythmic grunts and roars that sounded almost like it was talking. Not words, but there was an intelligence to it, like it was angry and trying to communicate. I've heard bears huff and growl, but this was different. It was paced, deliberate. Between the roars there were clicks and huffs, like it was sizing me up. I felt like prey, and I hated it. I'm the hunter, not the hunted. I raised my rifle and fired again, aiming near its feet. The shot echoed through the woods, but it didn't even react. No flinch, no pause. It just stopped hitting the tree and stared up at me. Its eyes, I'll never forget them. They were this intense red, not like fire, but dark and piercing, and they locked with mine. In that moment, I felt this wave of controlled anger coming from it. It wasn't mindless rage. It was like it was making a point. I knew, deep down, that it could have ripped me out of that tree if it wanted to, but it didn't. It just kept staring, and then it started pacing around, breaking nearby saplings with its hands like they were twigs. It was asserting dominance, showing me who was in charge. I stayed up there for what felt like hours. The sun moved across the sky, but the clouds kept it gloomy. My muscles started cramping from holding on so tight. My legs were numb and my back ached. I was sweating despite the cold, and my throat was dry. I kept expecting it to leave, but it didn't. It would circle the tree, hit it every now and then, and make those sounds. Sometimes it would stop and just watch me, and I'd feel this chill run down my spine. I've faced down charging bears and come out fine, but this was something else. I felt small, helpless. The worst part was the silence between its movements. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and quick, and the drip of water from the leaves. Then it would start up again. A grunt, a click, another slam against the tree. I thought about my family, my kids, and how I might not make it back. I've had close calls before, but this was the first time I genuinely thought I was going to die. After what must have been 3 or 4 hours, it suddenly stopped. It backed away from the tree, let out one last deep roar, and then slammed the trunk so hard I felt the wood splinter. Then it turned and melted into the brush. Just like that, it was gone. I waited, terrified it was a trick, but the woods went quiet again. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows, and I knew I had to get down. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the branches. I climbed down slowly, my legs stiff and sore. When I hit the ground, I didn't even bother looking for my pack. I just ran. I sprinted through the woods, tripping over roots, my heart in my throat. I could feel eyes on me, and when I glanced back, I saw it. Standing at the edge of the tree line, watching me, not moving, just staring with those red eyes. I didn't stop until I reached my ATV. I jumped on, fumbled with the keys, and gunned it out of there. I didn't look back again. When I got back to town, I was a mess. I told a couple of forest rangers I know, and they went out with me the next day to check the spot. We found the tree, deep gouges in the bark like something huge had been clawing at it, and the footprints. They were 17 inches long, pressed into the mud, with a stride that was way too long for a bear. The rangers confirmed it. They'd never seen anything like it. But I didn't need their confirmation. I knew what I saw. That day changed me. I used to love the wilderness, the solitude, the challenge. Now every time I go out, I'm on edge. I keep expecting to hear those heavy footsteps or see those red eyes. I still hunt, but it's not the same. I carry a bigger rifle now, and I never go alone if I can help it. But deep down, I know that thing could have killed me, and it didn't. It chose to intimidate, to scare me shitless, and it worked. I'll never understand why, and that's what haunts me the most. I just hope I never see it again. Story 7. It was one of those late summer days that always felt like the last good one before everything turned cold and grey. I must have been about 17, my brother 4 years younger. We were up at our family's cabin in northern Michigan, a place we'd been going since we were babies. The cabin itself was nothing fancy, just a wooden box with a leaky roof tucked away in the woods, but it was our favorite place in the world. That day, we decided to hike out to this creek we liked, a spot about an hour's walk from the cabin through a tangle of old trails. We'd done it a dozen times. We packed some sandwiches and water, told our parents we'd be back before dinner, and headed out. The sun was bright, but under the canopy of the pines and hemlocks, it was all shadows and cool, damp air. The smell was incredible. That mix of wet earth, pine needles, and something else, something wild and clean that you only find deep in the woods. We got to the creek, skipped some stones, ate our sandwiches, and just messed around. It was perfect. But on the way back, I made a stupid mistake. I took a turn that looked familiar, but it wasn't. I was so sure of myself telling my brother to stop worrying that I knew where I was, but after about 20 minutes of walking, nothing looked right. The trees were thicker, the path was fainter, and that comfortable, familiar feeling started to curdle into something else. My brother was the first to say it. "I don't think we've been here before." I brushed him off, but the knot in my stomach told me he was right. The sun was getting lower, casting long, distorted shadows that made every stump and rock look like something else. The woods got quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but a dead quiet. The birds had stopped singing. The insects had gone silent. All I could hear was our own breathing and the crunch of our footsteps on the dry leaves. We kept walking, hoping the trail would hook back up with something we knew, but it just seemed to fade into nothing. We were properly lost. My brother started to get really scared, his voice getting thin and high. I was trying to be the brave older sibling, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. I was just a kid too. The idea of being stuck out here after dark was terrifying. After what felt like an hour of wandering in circles, we finally broke through a wall of brush and stumbled onto a dirt road. It was just 2 ruts carved into the earth, but it felt like finding a highway. The relief was so powerful, it made my legs feel weak. We stood there for a second, just breathing, trying to figure out which way to go. The road ran east-west, and I knew the cabin was roughly south of us. If we went west, the road should eventually curve south and lead us back to the main logging road that would take us home. I was pointing, explaining this to my brother, trying to sound confident. He wasn't really listening. He was staring past me, down the road to the east, His face went completely blank, all the color just drained out of it. His mouth was slightly open, but no sound came out. He slowly lifted his hand and pointed. I turned. About 40 yards away, just standing at the edge of the tree line where the road bent, was a figure. My first thought, and I remember this so clearly, was that it was a guy in a really weird, shaggy coat. It was tall, so much taller than any person I had ever seen. It had to be 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall. It was built like a man, 2 arms, 2 legs, standing upright. But that's where the similarity ended. It was covered from head to toe in this thick, messy black hair. It wasn't like bear fur, which looks kind of uniform. This was uneven, almost clumpy in places, like an old matted shag rug. The outline of its body was jagged because of it. The hair was longer on its arms and shoulders, and shorter on its chest and legs, but it was all just this deep, solid black. The sun was behind us, so it was lit up pretty well, and I could see it clearly. It was just standing there, completely still. It wasn't leaning on a tree. It wasn't moving at all. It was facing us, but I couldn't make out a face. There was just a darkness where a face should be, a shadow under a heavy brow. I couldn't see eyes. I couldn't see a nose or a mouth. Just this dark patch. We froze. I mean, every muscle in my body locked up. It was like an electric current went through the ground and up into my feet. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. I just stared. My brain was screaming, trying to process what I was looking at. Is that a man? No. A bear? No. Bears don't stand like that. What is it? What the hell is it? The silence was the worst part. The woods were still dead quiet. This thing wasn't making a sound. No heavy breathing, no grunt, no rustle of leaves. It was a statue. A massive, living statue made of hair and shadow. I could feel my brother trembling next to me. A tiny whimpering sound finally escaped his throat, and that's what broke the spell for me. I tore my eyes away from the thing and looked at him. His eyes were wide with pure, undiluted terror, fixed on the figure. He was shaking so hard I thought he was going to collapse. My own fear was a cold, heavy weight in my chest, making it hard to breathe. But this surge of protectiveness washed over me. I had to get him out of there. I didn't speak. I couldn't have formed a sentence if I tried. I just grabbed his arm, my fingers digging into his jacket sleeve, and I pulled. I whispered one word, my voice a dry, cracked thing I didn't even recognize. Go. He didn't need to be told twice. We turned and started walking down the road, away from it. Not running. Not at first. It was this stiff, hurried walk, like if we moved too suddenly, we might trigger it. My back was tingling, the feeling you get when you know someone is watching you. I felt exposed, like a target. Every part of me was screaming to run, to just sprint as fast as I could, but some deep primal instinct told me not to run. Running is what prey does. We kept up that frantic, fast walk for about 50 feet. The urge to look back was overwhelming. I had to know if it was following us. I had to know if it had moved. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The road was empty. The spot where it had been standing was just an empty space between 2 pine trees. It was gone, vanished. That was almost worse. My heart, which was already pounding, just dropped into my stomach. Where did it go? It couldn't have just disappeared. The tree line was right there. If it had stepped back into the woods, we would have seen it move. It would have taken a step, it would have made a sound, but there was nothing. 1 second it was there, a solid physical thing, and the next second it was just not. That's when we ran. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. We didn't say a word to each other. We just ran. Our backpacks slammed against our backs. Our feet pounded on the hard dirt of the road. I held onto my brother's arm, half dragging him, terrified he would trip and fall. I didn't look back again. I couldn't. I was too afraid of what I might see chasing us. The run felt like it lasted forever, but it was probably only 5 or 10 minutes before we recognized a landmark, an old lightning-struck oak tree that we called the skeleton tree. We were on the right road. We were almost home. We didn't stop running until we burst out of the tree line and saw the rusty roof of our cabin. We scrambled up the porch steps, yanked the door open and fell inside, slamming it shut behind us and leaning against it, gasping for air. We were both drenched in sweat and shaking uncontrollably. My legs felt like jelly. My brother was crying, silent tears just streaming down his face. Our mom came into the room, her smile fading when she saw us. "What on earth happened to you two?" she asked. We tried to explain, talking over each other, our words tumbling out in a jumbled mess about a tall, black, hairy man in the woods. She just thought we'd gotten spooked by a shadow or a bear. She made us hot chocolate and told us to calm down. We never told our dad. He would have just laughed and called us city kids. We didn't talk about it much after that, not even to each other. It was like an unspoken agreement. It was too big, too strange, too scary to put into words. We just packed it away. Then, a few years later, I was home from college, flipping through channels on the TV. I landed on some cryptid show, the kind I'd normally just scoff at. They were talking about a creature called the Michigan Dogman, and then they showed an artist's depiction. It was like a punch to the gut. My breath caught in my throat. I sat up straight, my heart starting to race all over again. There it was, the same huge man-shaped body, the same thick, shaggy black hair, the same powerful build. The drawing even had that same featureless, shadowy face. I just sat there, frozen in my childhood living room, staring at the screen. All the terror from that day came rushing back, so vivid and fresh it was like I was 13 years old again, standing on that dirt road, feeling that primal, bone-deep fear. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a coat. It was that, whatever that was. I never told anyone about seeing that TV show. What would I even say? But in that moment, it was a confirmation. A horrible, chilling confirmation that my brother and I hadn't just been scared kids lost in the woods. We had seen something real. And to this day, I still don't know what it was, or why it was just standing there, watching us, or how it vanished without a sound. I just know that for a few seconds on a late summer afternoon, something impossible was real, and it looked right at us. No. Story 8. I remember it was a warm afternoon, maybe around 3 or 4 o'clock, with the sun starting to dip a little lower in the sky. The air had that sweet, earthy smell you only get in deep woods, mixed with the scent of pine and damp leaves. We'd parked my truck on this old logging road that was mostly overgrown, just a dirt track really. And we were sitting on the tailgate, kicking our feet and not saying much. It was one of those perfect, peaceful moments where you just feel completely relaxed. I had my arm around her, and we were listening to the birds chirping and the wind rustling through the trees. I've been hunting since I was a kid, so I know these woods pretty well, or at least I thought I did. That day, everything felt normal until it didn't. The first thing I heard was this faint, crunching sound, way off in the distance. At first, I barely noticed it. It was so quiet that I almost dismissed it as my imagination or maybe a squirrel scrambling around. But then it came again, a little louder this time, and I felt my wife tense up beside me. She's not as comfortable in the woods as I am, so she's always a bit jumpy, but this was different. The sound was coming from about 100 yards away, deep in the thicket where the trees were dense and shadows pooled between the trunks. I tried to play it cool, you know. I squeezed her shoulder and said probably just a squirrel or a deer moving through. But even as I said it, I was listening harder, and something about the rhythm of it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the light, skittering steps of a small animal. It was heavier, more deliberate, like whatever it was walking on 2 legs. I've spent enough time in the woods to know how animals move. Deer have that graceful, bounding gait. Bears can lumber on all 4s or 2, but this was different. This was a steady, rhythmic crunch, 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 like someone taking big, heavy steps, not fast but confident, like it knew exactly where it was going. My wife whispered, "Do you hear that?" And her voice was so tight it made the hair on my arm stand up. I nodded, but I didn't say anything else because I was too busy trying to figure out what the hell it was. The sound was getting closer, not in a rush, but steadily, like it was cutting a straight line toward us. I could hear branches snapping under its weight, not little twigs, but thicker stuff that made a sharp crack each time. That's when I started feeling this knot form in my stomach. As a hunter, I'm used to tracking animals, but this didn't match anything I'd ever encountered. It was too loud for a person, unless they were wearing boots and stomping around. But who would be out here? We were miles from any houses, and this wasn't a hiking trail. The crunching kept getting louder, and now I could hear the pace of it. Each step was evenly spaced like a clock ticking, but heavier, more solid. It sounded like it was maybe 50 yards away now, and I could feel the vibrations through the ground, a subtle thud that made the tailgate tremble under us. My wife's grip on my arm tightened, her fingers digging into my skin. She was breathing fast, shallow breaths, and I could see the fear in her eyes. "We need to go," she said, her voice shaking. "Now." I wanted to stay, to see what it was, because part of me was curious, maybe even stubborn. I thought, maybe it's a moose or something, though I've never seen one around here. But the sound was too upright, too human-like. It wasn't the shuffling of a bear. Bears move with a sort of rolling gait, and this was straight up and down, like a person walking. But no person could make that much noise without trying. Each step sounded like it was crushing through layers of leaves and sticks, and I could almost feel the weight behind it, like whatever it was massive. The air around us felt colder suddenly, even though the sun was still out. A chill ran down my spine, and I found myself holding my breath, listening. The sound was so close now, maybe 30 yards away, and I could hear it breathing, or at least, I think that's what it was. This low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl, more like a heavy exhale, like when you're out of breath, but trying to keep quiet. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my palms were sweaty. I kept scanning the trees, but I couldn't see anything moving. The woods were too thick, all shadows and leaves, and the sound seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. My wife was practically pulling me off the tailgate now. "Please, let's just go," she begged, and there was this raw terror in her voice that I'd never heard before. It wasn't just fear, it was pure dread, like she knew something I didn't. That's when I gave in. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared too. This wasn't curiosity anymore. It was survival instinct kicking in. Whatever was out there, it wasn't something we wanted to meet. I jumped down from the tailgate, my legs feeling wobbly, and helped her into the truck. My hands were shaking so bad I fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before I could get the door open. The whole time, that crunching sound kept getting closer, and now it was so loud it felt like it was right on top of us, maybe 20 yards away. I could hear it moving through the underbrush, snapping branches like they were nothing, and that heavy breathing was louder too, a deep, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. As I slammed the door shut, I glanced toward the woods, and for a split second I thought I saw something move. A dark shape, taller than a man, shifting between the trees, but it was so quick and the light was fading that I couldn't be sure. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life, way louder than usual, like it was screaming in the silence. I threw the truck into gear and peeled out, spraying dirt and gravel behind us. We didn't say a word for the first 10 minutes of driving. I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white, and my wife was curled up in the passenger seat, her face pale. I kept checking the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see something following us, but there was nothing. Just empty road and trees. The whole drive back, my mind was racing. What was that thing? Why did it sound so human, but so wrong? I've been in the woods my whole life, and I've never heard anything like it, not even close. When we got home, we both just sat in the driveway for a while, not talking. Eventually we went inside, but neither of us could sleep that night. Every little noise made us jump, and I kept replaying that sound in my head, the steady, heavy steps, the breathing, the way it seemed to zero in on us. It wasn't random. It felt intentional, like it knew we were there and was coming for us. Over the years, I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear acting strange, or a person playing a prank, but nothing fits. Bears don't walk that upright for that long, and no person could make that much noise without being seen. I've read stories online about similar things, people hearing footsteps in the woods that don't match any animal, and it always sends a chill through me. That day in Row changed how I feel about the woods. I still go out there, but I'm always on edge, always listening for that sound. And sometimes, when it's quiet, I can still hear it in my memory, that rhythmic crunching, getting closer, and the fear that came with it. I never saw what it was, and maybe that's the worst part. Not knowing. Just this presence, this thing that was there, and then gone, leaving us with nothing but a memory that still haunts me to this day. Story 9. I still get chills thinking about that day. It was a Friday, the 19th of July. My cousin and I had been planning this fishing trip to Gerald Cove for weeks. We were both burned out from work, him from his construction gig, and me from staring at a computer screen in my apartment in Retton. And we just needed to get out, you know? Get some air, catch some fish, drink a few beers by a fire. The kind of simple plan that's supposed to be nothing but good. We left my place around 7:30 in the evening. The truck was packed with all our gear. Rods, the cooler, a couple of sleeping bags, and a cheap tent I'd bought on sale. The sun was starting to dip, casting this long, orange glow over everything. It felt good to be moving. We were joking around. The radio was on, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could feel the stress just melting off my shoulders. The drive out of Retton is pretty straightforward, and we made good time past Olympia, turning onto Highway 3. The landscape starts to change there. The buildings thin out, and the trees get thicker, darker. It's that point where you feel like you're truly leaving the world behind. I remember we passed a couple of deer just standing near the tree line. They didn't bolt like deer usually do. They just stood there, completely still, watching us drive by. Their eyes caught the headlights and glowed for a second, and then we were past them. My cousin pointed it out. "Look at that," he said. "They're not even spooked." It was a little odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time. You see deer all the time. The light was fading fast, and I was focused on finding the turnoff to the campground access road. I'd only been to Gerald Cove once before, years ago with my dad, and my memory of the exact spot was a little fuzzy. I was looking for a break in the trees, a small unmarked gravel road. I ended up missing it. I drove right past the damn thing. I only realized it a half-mile later when nothing looked familiar. "Ah, crap," I muttered, slowing down. "I think I blew past the turn." My cousin just shrugged. "No big deal, just turn around." There wasn't a lot of traffic, so I found a wider spot in the road a little further up to do a three-point turn. It took a minute. The road is narrow and winding there, edged by a steep slope on one side and a dense wall of timber on the other. I had to crank the wheel hard, reverse, then pull forward again to get us pointed back the way we came. It was during that maneuver, as my headlights swept across the road and up the wooded slope on the passenger side, that I saw it. My brain didn't process it at first. It was just a shape, a disruption in the normal pattern of trees and shadows. But then the light held on it for a second and my eyes focused. It was a figure, a huge, dark, hairy figure walking on two legs. It was about 60 yards away, maybe a little more, already halfway across the road and heading up the slope into the timber. It was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 1.5 feet taller and built like a power lifter. Its arms were ridiculously long, swinging at its sides. The whole body was covered in what looked like black or very dark brown hair, shaggy and matted. Its head wasn't round like a man's. It was sort of conical, pointed at the top. It wasn't running, it wasn't scrambling. It was just walking with this powerful, steady, purposeful stride. One foot in front of the other, eating up the ground. It moved like it owned the place, like it had somewhere to be, and nothing was going to stop it. It never turned its head, it never looked at us. It just kept going, disappearing into the thick trees like it was made of shadow. The whole sighting lasted maybe 3 seconds, 4, tops. My heart just dropped into my stomach. A cold wave washed over me, from my scalp down to my feet. My hands froze on the steering wheel. "Whoa, what was that?" my cousin said, leaning forward from the passenger seat. He'd seen the movement, the shape in the periphery of the headlights. I couldn't speak for a second. I just stared at the empty spot where it had been. The truck was now idling, pointed back down the highway. You saw that?" I finally managed, my voice coming out as a croak. "Saw something move, big. Was it a bear?" he asked, his tone casual, curious. I shook my head, my eyes still glued to the tree line. My mouth was dry. "No, man, that wasn't a bear. It had to be a bear, a big black bear, standing up. It wasn't standing up, it was walking on 2 legs, the whole time. I could hear the tremor in my own voice. Its arms, they were so long." He laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Dude, you're seeing things. It was a bear." The light was weird. "Come on, let's get to the campsite before it's pitch black." He didn't get it. He hadn't seen it clearly. To him, it was just a blur, a trick of the light. To me, it was burned into my retinas, every detail, the way its shoulders moved, the sheer mass of it. I've spent my whole life in Idaho. I've seen black bears, grizzlies, moose, elk. I know what they look like, how they move. A bear on its hind legs is clumsy, slow, tentative. It doesn't stride. It doesn't move with that kind of confident, ground-covering purpose. This was something else. I drove the rest of the way to the turnoff in a complete daze, my knuckles white on the wheel, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror and the dark woods outside my window. My cousin had already moved on, fiddling with the radio, talking about what lures we should use in the morning. I couldn't hear him. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart in my ears. We found the gravel road and bounced down it for about a mile until we reached the clearing that served as the campground for Gerald Cove. It was fully dark by then. We worked in silence mostly, setting up the tent by the beams of our headlamps. The beams felt so small and weak against the immense blackness of the forest around us. Every little sound, a twig snapping, the rustle of leaves, made me jump. My cousin noticed. "You're really spooked, huh?" he said, hammering a tent peg into the hard ground. "I know what I saw," I said, my voice low. He just shook his head and went back to work. We got a small fire going, cooked some hot dogs, but I had no appetite. The food tasted like ash. I just sat there on a log, staring into the flames. But really, I was listening to the forest. It was too quiet. The usual chorus of crickets and frogs felt muted, distant. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like something is holding its breath. My cousin crashed out almost as soon as he zipped himself into his sleeping bag. I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, in my bag, listening to him snore softly. The fabric of the tent was thin, and I felt exposed. The image of that thing walking up the slope kept playing on a loop behind my eyes. The long arms, the pointed head, the effortless, powerful movement. Then I heard it. It started from the southwest, from deep in the timber, a sound that cut through the silence so starkly it felt like a physical blow. It was a whoop, a deep, resonant, guttural whoop. It wasn't high-pitched like an owl or a coyote. This was low, so low I could feel it vibrate in my chest cavity. It was the kind of sound you feel as much as you hear. It echoed through the trees, lasting for 2, maybe 3 seconds. Then it stopped. I lay there, frozen, not even daring to breathe. My whole body was rigid, my ears were straining, trying to filter out my cousin's breathing, the crackle of the dying fire outside, anything but that silence. Then it came again, the same sound, from the same direction. Ooh, deep, chesty, vibrating. It wasn't a scream of aggression. It wasn't a howl of pain. It was a call, a communication, and it felt close, a lot closer than I was comfortable with. An eighth of a mile, maybe less. The sound carried so well in the cold, still air, it was hard to tell, but my gut told me it was right there, just inside the tree line, watching our camp. A third whoop, a fourth, 4 or 5 in total, spaced about 30 seconds apart. I know the sounds of these woods. I grew up in them. I've heard mountain lions scream, and it's a terrifying sound, but it's sharp, piercing. I've heard elk bugle, and it's majestic, melodic. This was neither. This was primitive. It was a sound that didn't belong on any recording in any field guide. It was a sound that shouldn't exist. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was afraid it would wake my cousin. A cold sweat had broken out all over my body, making my sleeping bag feel damp and clammy. I was shaking, a fine, uncontrollable tremor that started deep in my core. I felt a primal fear, the kind that bypasses your brain and talks directly to your lizard brain, the part that knows when a predator is near. Every hair on my arms and neck was standing straight up. I didn't smell anything, no rot, no musk, nothing like that. I just felt its presence, a heavy, watching presence from the southwest. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep into my bones, that it was the same thing I'd seen on the road. It knew we were here. The whooping stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The heavy silence returned, somehow even more oppressive than before. I didn't move a muscle for what felt like hours. I just lay there, staring up at the dark ceiling of the tent, listening, waiting for a twig to snap right outside, for a shadow to fall over the tent fabric. I expected to see a silhouette, to hear heavy breathing. Nothing happened. The night dragged on, minute by minute, agonizing minute. I must have drifted off into a fitful, terrified sleep just before dawn, because the next thing I knew, grey light was filtering through the tent fabric and birds were chirping. The normal sounds of the forest had returned. I unzipped my bag and stepped out into the cold morning air. My body ached from tension. My cousin was still dead asleep. I walked over to the edge of the clearing, towards the southwest, where the sounds had come from. The ground was hard, dry, covered in a layer of pine needles and dead leaves. I wasn't expecting to find a perfect, clear footprint, and I didn't. But I saw a few places where the ground was scuffed, where it looked like something heavy had displaced the dirt and needles. There were no distinct toe marks, no clear heel impressions, just disturbances. On the slope leading up from the road, where I'd seen it disappear, the undergrowth was trampled in a path that was too wide for a deer. It was just signs, enough to confirm to me that I hadn't dreamed the whole thing. We packed up our camp a few hours later. My cousin was in a great mood, talking about coming back next weekend. I just nodded, my mind 1,000 miles away. I didn't tell him about the whoops. He'd slept through the whole thing. He would have just laughed again. We drove back out the gravel road, and when we reached the spot on Highway 3, I slowed down. I looked up that slope into the dense timber. It just looked like trees. Normal, quiet, innocent trees, but I knew what was in there. I knew it was real. That was 5 years ago. I've never gone back to Gerald Cove. My cousin still goes up there sometimes, and he always asks me to come along. I always make an excuse. I can't explain it to him in a way he'd understand. How do you tell someone that you saw something that shouldn't exist, that it looked right through you like you were nothing, and that later, in the deep dark, it called out to you? How do you describe that kind of fear? The kind that sinks into your bones and stays there. I just know what I saw. I know what I heard. And some nights when the house is quiet and the wind is blowing just right outside, I think I can still hear that deep, vibrating whoop, and the cold fear washes right back over me all over again. Story 10. So, this is something I've never really talked about with anyone except Joshua, and even then, we kind of avoid it because it just freaks us out too much. But I guess I need to get it off my chest. and maybe someone here has had something similar happen. It was back in January 2015, and we were living in this little house in South Dakota, right on the edge of some dense woods. Joshua and I loved being outdoors. Cross-country skiing was our thing, especially in the winter when everything was quiet and covered in snow. But that January, things got weird, and one day in particular still haunts me. I remember waking up that morning, and it was cold, like the kind of cold that seeps into your bones even inside the house. The heater was rattling, and I could see my breath a little in the bedroom. Joshua was already up, which was unusual for him. He's not much of a morning person. I rolled over and saw him standing by the window, just staring out into the backyard. His posture was tense, shoulders hunched, and I knew right away something was wrong. "What is it?" I asked, my voice still groggy from sleep. He didn't turn around, just kept looking out. "Come here," he said, and his tone was low, almost a whisper. I got out of bed, the floorboards cold under my bare feet, and joined him at the window. The backyard was covered in a fresh layer of snow from overnight, pure white and untouched, except for one thing, a line of footprints. They started at the tree line and cut straight across the yard, heading down toward the stream behind our property. My heart did this little jump, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The footprints were huge, like bigger than any human foot I'd ever seen. I'd guess about 15 inches long, and they were barefoot with distinct toes pressed into the snow. What got me was how they were arranged, single file, with about 6 feet between each step, like whatever made them was taking massive strides. The snow around them was deep, probably a foot or so, but the prints themselves were clear and sharp, as if whatever made them had walked through it without any effort. There were no drag marks, no signs of struggling, just these perfect, eerie impressions. Joshua pointed a trembling finger. "I saw tracks like this before, when we were skiing a couple days ago," he said, his voice shaky. "But these are closer, right in our yard." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. A couple days earlier, we'd been out cross-country skiing on a trail near the woods. It was a bright, sunny day, and we were having fun, gliding through the snow and laughing. Then we came across these massive footprints in the snow, about 18 or 19 inches long, also barefoot and in a single file. At the time, we joked about it maybe being a bear or something, but bears don't have feet that look human-like, with toes and everything. Joshua said he'd seen similar tracks a week or so before that, but he didn't mention it because he thought it was nothing. Now, seeing them in our backyard, it felt different, more personal, more threatening. We stood there for what felt like forever, just staring out the window. The sun was starting to rise, casting a pale orange light over the snow, but it didn't make things feel warmer or safer. Instead, it highlighted how isolated we were. Our nearest neighbor was a mile away, and the woods stretched out for acres behind us. Usually I loved the solitude, but in that moment, it felt suffocating. "We should check it out," Joshua said finally. But I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. I shook my head. "No way, let's just, I don't know, call someone or ignore it." But we both knew ignoring it wasn't an option. After a quick breakfast, neither of us had much appetite. We bundled up and went outside to get a closer look. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, and the snow crunched under our boots. As we approached the footprints, I could see details I hadn't from the window. The toes were long and almost human-like, but the sheer size was unnerving. I knelt down, my knees sinking into the snow, and measured one with my handspan. My hand is about 7 inches from thumb to pinky, and the print was easily twice that. Joshua did the same, and we just looked at each other, our breath puffing out in white clouds. "Whatever this is, it's big," he muttered, "and it walked right through here like it owned the place." The tracks led from the woods, across the yard, and down to the stream, where they disappeared into the water. We followed them cautiously, keeping our distance. The snow was undisturbed around the prints, which was bizarre because the snow was deep enough, that even we would have left a mess if we tried to walk through it without skis or snowshoes. This thing had moved effortlessly, as if it weighed nothing or had some kind of supernatural grace. I know that sounds crazy, but that's how it felt. We didn't see anything else. No broken branches, no fur, no signs of an animal, just those footprints. After a while, we went back inside, both of us quiet. The whole day we were on edge. We tried to go about our normal routine. I did some work on my laptop. Joshua tinkered with his skis, but every little noise made us jump. The wind whistling through the trees, a branch tapping against the roof, even the fridge humming too loud. My stomach was in knots, and I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. It was like there was this presence out there, just beyond the tree line, waiting. As the day wore on, the sky turned grey and overcast, and by late afternoon it started to snow again. Big, fat flakes drifting down, adding another layer to the white blanket outside. We decided to try and relax on the sun porch around dusk. The sun porch is this enclosed space at the back of the house with big windows looking out into the yard and the woods. Usually, it's my favorite spot. Cozy and warm, with a couple of armchairs and a small heater. That evening, though, it felt exposed. The windows were like giant eyes staring into the darkness, and I kept pulling the curtains shut, then opening them again because I didn't want to not see what was out there. We were sitting there sipping hot tea, trying to talk about anything else, when we heard it. At first, it was just a faint knocking sound, like someone tapping on a tree trunk. It echoed from deep in the woods, rhythmic and steady. Knock, knock, knock. Then it stopped, and for a moment there was silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air is holding its breath. My heart started pounding, and I set my tea down, my hands trembling. Joshua leaned forward, his eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. Then it came again, louder this time, and closer. The knocking was followed by this scream. I don't even know how to describe it properly. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. Not a coyote, not a bobcat, nothing. It sounded like a tornado siren mixed with a woman screaming in absolute agony. The kind you hear in those true crime shows where someone's in severe distress. It was high-pitched and piercing, and it seemed to come from all directions at once, echoing through the trees and making the windows vibrate. I felt a jolt of pure fear shoot through me, and I grabbed Joshua's arm, my fingers digging into his sleeve. "What the hell is that?" I gasped, my voice cracking. He stood up, his face pale. "I don't know, but it's close." The screaming went on for what felt like minutes, rising and falling in intensity. Then it cut off abruptly, leaving that heavy silence again. My ears were ringing, and I could feel my pulse throbbing in my neck. We both rushed to the window, peering out into the growing darkness. The snow was falling heavier now, reducing visibility to just a few yards. We couldn't see anything moving, but the feeling of being watched intensified. It was like there was something out there, just beyond the tree line, staring back at us. "We need to call someone," I said, my voice shaky. "The sheriff, maybe." Joshua nodded, already pulling out his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He dialed the number, and I could hear the dispatcher's voice on the other end, calm and professional. Joshua explained what we'd heard, the knocking, the screams, and that we'd seen large footprints earlier. He sounded frantic, and I could tell the dispatcher was trying to calm him down. She said they'd send someone out. While we waited, we stayed on the sun porch, too scared to move. The heater was on, but I was shivering uncontrollably, my teeth chattering. Every little sound made me jump. The wind, the creak of the house, even our own breathing. Joshua kept pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair. "This is insane," he kept muttering. "What is it? What is it?" After what felt like an eternity, we saw headlights pulling into our driveway. It was the sheriff's car, followed by another deputy in a truck. We rushed to the front door to let them in. The sheriff was a tall, sturdy man named Bill. We'd met him a couple times before at town events. He had a calm demeanor, but even he looked concerned when we explained everything. We brought them to the sun porch and pointed out where the sounds had come from. The deputies shined their flashlights into the woods, the beams cutting through the snow and darkness. At first, everything was quiet except for the wind. Then, just as one of the deputies was saying it was probably just a wild animal, we heard it again. Another scream, this time even closer. It was that same agonizing, siren-like wail, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. One of the deputies flinched and raised his flashlight higher. "Jesus," the sheriff muttered. "That doesn't sound like any animal I know." They decided to do a quick search of the area around the house. Joshua and I stayed inside, watching from the window as they moved through the yard, their flashlights dancing in the darkness. The snow was coming down hard now, and their footprints were quickly filling in. They went out toward the tree line, but after about 15 minutes, they came back, shaking their heads. "Nothing out there," the sheriff said when they came inside, stamping snow off their boots. "No tracks, no signs of anything. Could be a coyote or maybe a fisher cat. They can make some weird noises. But those screams, I've never heard anything like that." I wanted to believe him, but I knew what we'd heard, and those footprints from the morning were real. We told him about them, and he said he'd make a note of it, but there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. They left soon after, advising us to lock up and call if we heard anything else. After they drove away, the house felt emptier and more vulnerable than ever. Joshua and I just stood in the living room, listening to the silence. The fear hadn't gone away. If anything, it was worse now that we were alone again. We decided to barricade ourselves in the bedroom for the night, moving a dresser in front of the door and keeping a baseball bat nearby. I don't think either of us slept much. Every creak and groan of the house had me bolting upright, heart racing. At one point, I thought I heard soft footsteps outside the window, but when I looked, there was nothing but snow. The next morning, we woke up exhausted and on edge. The snow had stopped, and the world outside was quiet and still. We forced ourselves to look out the window, and sure enough, there were new footprints in the backyard, identical to the ones from the day before, leading from the woods through the yard and down to the stream, fresh, clear, and terrifying. We reported it to the sheriff again, but he said the same thing, probably an animal, and without any other signs, there wasn't much to go on. We never figured out what it was. A few weeks later, we moved out of that house. Joshua got a job offer in another state, and we took it as a sign to leave. But to this day, I still hear those screams in my dreams, and I see those footprints in the snow. Whatever was out there, it felt intelligent, almost mocking, and I have no explanation for any of it. Story 11. Okay, so I've never really posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for years now. I still can't go into the woods without feeling this cold knot in my stomach, and honestly, I jump at every little sound. This happened back in September of 2019, and I was up in northern Michigan with my buddy. We're both really into foraging, especially for mushrooms. Chanterelles were in season, and we'd heard about this spot west of the Hiawatha National Forest boundary that was supposed to be untouched, really prime picking ground. We'd been there a couple times before without any issues, just quiet, peaceful days filling our baskets. That morning, we got an early start. The air was cool and damp, typical for late summer up there, with that fresh, earthy smell you only get deep in the woods. We parked my truck off this old logging road, more of a dirt path really, and hiked in about a mile or so. The forest was thick with pine and oak, the ground spongy with needles and leaves. We split up a bit, but stayed within earshot, calling out when we found a good patch. It was all normal, you know? The kind of morning where you just lose yourself in the rhythm of it, bending down, checking under leaves, the quiet crunch of your boots. I remember feeling really content, like this was exactly where I was meant to be. Then, around 9:15 in the morning, things started to change. I was kneeling by a fallen log, my basket half full with golden chanterelles, when I heard this dull, rhythmic tapping off in the distance. At first I thought it was a woodpecker. We get a lot of those, but this was different. It was slower, heavier, like someone knocking on a tree with a big stick. I stood up and listened, and that's when I noticed the silence. The birds had stopped chirping, no squirrels chattering, no rustling in the underbrush. It was dead quiet, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I called over to my buddy, and he said he heard it too, this tapping and occasional wood cracks from the ridge above us. Not loud, but enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. We both froze for a second, just listening. The tapping kept going, steady, almost methodical. Then it stopped, and the silence felt even heavier. I remember my heart starting to pound, not from exertion, but from this weird, creeping dread. I've been in the woods my whole life. I know what normal sounds like, and this wasn't it. My buddy gestured for us to move closer together, and we did, keeping our voices low. We decided to pack up and head back, but as we were gathering our stuff, this smell hit us. It was heavy and musky, like wet fur mixed with rotting leaves and something else I can't even describe, almost like old damp earth. It was so strong, it made my eyes water a little, and I felt this chill run down my spine. That's when we saw it. Through the trees, maybe 50 yards away, this large, dark shape moved. It was huge, over 7 feet tall, with massive shoulders that looked like they could break branches just by brushing past them. It was covered in dark brown hair, matted and shaggy, and it had a wide, flat face with deep-set eyes that seemed to gleam in the dim light. It wasn't a bear. I've seen plenty of bears, and this was different. It stood upright, pacing parallel to us, moving with this eerie grace that didn't match its size. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel my hands trembling. I dropped my basket. Chanterelles spilled everywhere, but I didn't even care. All I could think was, what the hell is that? My buddy shouted something. I don't even remember what. Probably, hey, or get back. And that's when it turned its head toward us. Its eyes locked on mine, and it let out this guttural roar that echoed through the woods. It wasn't like any animal sound I've ever heard. It was deep and raw, like it was tearing out of its chest, and it vibrated in my bones. I felt this physical pressure, like the sound was pushing against me. My ears rang, and for a second I couldn't move. Then adrenaline kicked in, and I grabbed my buddy's arm. "We need to go now," I whispered, but it came out as a croak. The creature took a step toward us, and that's when it happened. It reached down, picked up this massive branch, like the size of a small tree, and threw it with inhuman strength. It wasn't just tossed, it was hurled like a spear. The branch slammed into a pine tree about 20 feet from us, splintering it with a crack that sounded like gunfire. Wood chips flew everywhere, and I felt one sting my cheek. That was the moment any doubt left my mind. This thing was aggressive, and it wanted us out. We turned and ran. I've never run so fast in my life. My legs felt like jelly, but I pushed through, stumbling over roots and rocks. I could hear it behind us, not running, but moving fast, crashing through the undergrowth. Its footsteps were heavy, thudding against the ground, and I could still smell that musky odor, stronger now, like it was right on our heels. I didn't look back. I was too scared. But my buddy glanced over his shoulder and said it was keeping pace, just off to the side, like it was herding us. The forest blurred around me, branches whipping at my face and arms. I felt a sharp pain in my ankle as I twisted it on a root, but I kept going, fueled by pure terror. We burst out of the trees onto the logging road where we'd parked the truck. It was only about 100 yards away, but it felt like miles. I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get them out of my pocket. My buddy was right behind me, panting, his face pale. As I unlocked the door, That roar came again, closer this time, and it felt like it was right behind us. The sound was so intense, it made my chest hurt, and I swear, I felt the ground shake. We scrambled into the truck and I turned the key, the engine roaring to life. I threw it into drive and peeled out, spraying dirt and gravel. Just as we started moving, something heavy hit the back of the truck. It wasn't a branch this time. It was louder, like a thud that rocked the whole vehicle. I didn't stop to look. I just floored it, driving like a maniac down that bumpy road until we hit the main highway. My hands were glued to the wheel, knuckles white, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. We didn't say a word for the first 10 minutes. Just sat there in stunned silence, breathing hard. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing chasing us, but there was nothing, just empty road and trees. Later that day, after we'd calmed down a bit, we went back with a couple of friends, armed this time, to see if we could find any evidence, and we did. Right where we'd been, there were these huge footprints in the mud, each one about 17 inches long, with deep impressions that showed how heavy it must have been. We found the branch it had thrown, shattered into pieces against that pine tree, and my basket was still there, trampled and empty. Seeing it all made the fear come rushing back, cold and sharp. We took some photos, but we didn't stick around long. The place felt wrong, like we weren't welcome anymore. I haven't been back to that spot since, and my buddy won't even talk about it much. We both know what we saw, and it wasn't some random animal. It was smart, calculated, the way it paced us, the way it escalated from tapping to that roar, like it was deliberately warning us off. I still have nightmares about those deep-set eyes and that smell. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I'll hear a noise outside and my whole body goes tense. I don't know what it was, but I'm convinced it was territorial, and we stumbled into its space, and that thought alone is enough to keep me out of the deep woods for good. Story 12. It was the winter of 1988, and I was out deer hunting in the Monongahela National Wildlife Refuge in West Virginia. I remember the date because it was the tail end of the season, and I was getting desperate. I'd taken the whole week off from the factory, and I hadn't even gotten a decent shot yet. I was 32 years old, and I'd been hunting these woods with my dad since I was a kid. I knew them, or at least I thought I did. I got a late start that day. Didn't make it to the refuge until the afternoon. The sun was already starting to dip behind the mountains, and the light was getting that flat, grey quality it gets in winter, where everything looks the same, and shadows start to stretch out long and blue. I remember being annoyed with myself for wasting the morning. I'd promised my wife I'd fix the kitchen faucet, and of course it took twice as long as I thought it would. So by the time I pulled my old Ford pickup into the gravel lot at the edge of the refuge, I was in a hurry. I hurried along this old logging trail I knew, one that cuts down through a holler towards the Shavers Fork River. The air was cold and still, the kind of cold that seeps right through your Carhartt jacket and settles in your bones. My breath was pluming out in front of me, and the only sounds were my own boots crunching on the frozen ground and the occasional scrabble of a squirrel in the leaves. I was moving with a purpose, hoping to get to a good spot, a clearing I knew, before the last of the light was gone. I wasn't really paying attention to anything but the trail ahead of me and the sinking feeling that I was about to get skunked again. I found my spot near a group of big hemlocks that had grown up around a rock outcropping. It gave me a good view down into the river basin. I settled in, my back against a cold, rough-barked tree, and just tried to slow my breathing. The silence out there, when you really stop to listen, is heavy. It's not empty, it's full. You can hear the trees creak, the faint trickle of water, the blood pounding in your own ears. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes just watching, my rifle resting across my knees. My fingers were starting to get numb even through my gloves. That's when I first heard the rustling. It was off to my right, down in the basin, maybe 150 yards away. It wasn't the light, skittery sound of a squirrel or a rabbit. This was heavier, a slow, methodical crunching through the dry undergrowth. My first thought, my only thought, was deer, a big one by the sound of it. My heart kicked up a notch. This was it. This was why I'd come out here in the freezing cold. I stayed perfectly still, just turning my head slowly to try and pinpoint the sound. It was hard to see through the thicket of bare winter branches. The light was fading fast, turning the world into shades of grey and deep blue. I couldn't make out any shapes, just the movement of the sound. It was moving parallel to me, not coming closer. I remember a spike of frustration. If it kept that course, it would move behind a dense stand of rhododendrons and I'd lose my chance. I had to get closer. I had to see. I know it was stupid. A real hunter would have stayed put, waited for the animal to come to him, but I was impatient, and the light was dying. I got up into a low crouch, my knees protesting, and started to move as quietly as I could off the trail and down the slope towards the river. Every step felt incredibly loud. I'd take a step, pause, listen. The rustling was still there, steady. It wasn't running, it was just moving. I found a smaller tree to hide behind, closer to the basin floor. I was maybe 80 yards from the sound now. I could hear it better. It wasn't just the crunch of leaves. There was a wet, squelching sound too, like it was walking through the muddy banks of the river. I lifted my rifle. It was a Remington 700 with a night vision scope I'd saved up for 2 years. It was my pride and joy. I flipped the cap open and put my eye to the lens. The world went that familiar ghostly green. Everything was sharp and clear, but in this weird monochrome way, I scanned the area where the sound was coming from. At first, I saw nothing. Just the green-tinted trunks of trees, the dark mass of the rhododendrons, the pale gleam of frost on the ground. Then I saw it. It was a silhouette at first, a big, dark shape standing between two sycamores. My brain, trying to make sense of it, immediately said, "Man in a big fur coat." Maybe another hunter, a weirdo wearing a ghillie suit or something, but it was so tall. The sycamores were big trees, and this thing's head was well above the lowest branches. I adjusted the focus, my thumb slick on the dial. The image snapped into clarity, and my breath caught in my throat so hard I thought I'd choke. It wasn't a man. It was covered in hair, not like a bear's fur, but long, shaggy, dark hair. It was standing on 2 legs, and it was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be over 8 feet easy. Its legs were too long, its arms were way too long, hanging down past its knees. The arms were thick like tree limbs, and its head... God, its head. It was ape-like, but not like any ape I'd ever seen in a zoo. It had a massive, heavy brow, and its face was flattened, pushed in. I couldn't see any neck to speak of. Its head just seemed to sit right on its broad shoulders, and its feet. I looked down. It wasn't wearing boots. Its feet were huge, bare and dark, gripping the frozen mud. That detail, for some reason, hit me harder than anything. The sheer primal wrongness of it. It was just standing there, completely still, facing away from me, looking up the opposite slope. I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the winter air spread through my chest. This wasn't a deer, this wasn't a bear, this wasn't a man. I didn't know what the hell this was. My finger, which had been resting on the trigger guard, was now trembling. I was holding my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to get out. Then it turned. It didn't snap its head around. It was a slow, deliberate pivot of its whole upper body, and it looked right at me. I was looking right into its face through the scope. Its eyes, they weren't reflective like an animal's. They were dark, deep-set pits in that green world, but I could feel them. I know how that sounds, but I swear to God I could feel its gaze. It was an intelligence, a cold, ancient, knowing intelligence. It wasn't the blank stare of a startled buck. It was looking at me. It saw me hiding behind that tree 80 yards away in the near dark. It knew I was there. A chill, a physical wave of it, shot down my spine and into my legs. My bladder felt weak. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to get the hell out of there. But I was frozen, paralyzed. I was just a guy looking through a scope at something that wasn't supposed to exist. We stayed like that for what felt like a full minute, just locked in that stare. It didn't make a sound. It didn't show its teeth. It just looked. Then, it moved. It turned its body fully towards my left and started to walk. Not a run, a walk. A long, loping, powerful stride that covered ground incredibly fast. It crossed the river basin, its huge feet barely seeming to sink into the muck. It moved with a grace that was terrifying for something so massive. It reached the timberline on the other side and started to run up the slope, effortlessly navigating the steep, rocky terrain. And the whole time, as it ran up that hill, its head was turned and it kept its eyes on me. I can still see it in my mind, clear as day, that huge, dark shape moving with impossible speed up a mountainside, its head craned over its shoulder, those dark eyes fixed on my position. It was a warning, a display. It was showing me it knew where I was, and it was letting me know it could leave me in the dust whenever it wanted. It disappeared into the thick woods at the top of the ridge. I finally let out the breath I'd been holding in a ragged gasp. I lowered the rifle, my arms shaking so bad I could barely hold it. I was drenched in a cold sweat. I just stood there, leaning against the tree, trying to process what I had just seen. My mind was a frantic, scrambled mess. Bear, no. Man, no. What? What was it? Then the sound started. First, it was a low whoop. It came from the direction it had gone, from the top of that ridge. It was a deep, guttural sound, but it carried through the silent woods like a shockwave. Then another, higher this time, and another. They started to rise in pitch, one after another, getting faster and louder. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. It sounded almost like a siren, an emergency siren, but made with a living throat, a screaming whoop that climbed and climbed until it felt like it was piercing my eardrums. As the whooping reached its peak, I heard the sound of branches snapping, not little twigs. These were loud, sharp cracks, like someone was taking a sledgehammer to dead trees, one after another. Crack, crack, crack. It was violent, it was angry, it was a show of pure, raw power. That broke the spell. The fear that had been holding me frozen turned into pure, undiluted terror. I didn't think, I just ran. I scrambled back up the slope, my boots slipping on the frozen leaves, my rifle banging against my back. I didn't look behind me. I didn't stop to listen. I just ran like hell was chasing me. Branches whipped at my face and tore at my jacket, but I didn't feel them. All I could hear was the blood roaring in my ears and the memory of those screaming whoops. I made it back to the logging trail and didn't slow down. I ran all the way back to my truck, my lungs burning in the cold air. I threw my gear in the back, jumped in the cab and locked the doors. I sat there for a long time, just gripping the steering wheel, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. It was fully dark now. I looked out at the black wall of the woods, half expecting to see those dark eyes staring back at me from the tree line. I couldn't drive home. I was too shaken. I drove to a campground a few miles outside the refuge, a place I knew had other people. I needed to be around other people. I set up my tent in a daze, my hands still trembling as I hammered in the stakes. I built a fire and just sat there, staring into the flames, trying to get warm. But the cold was inside me now. A guy from the camper next to me, an older fellow with a beard, came over and offered me a beer. I must have looked like hell. I took it with a mumbled thanks. He sat down on the log next to me and asked if I'd had any luck hunting. I didn't know what to say. I just started talking. The words tumbled out of me in a jumbled mess. I told him about the rustling, about using the scope, about the thing I saw. I described its height, its hair, its face, the way it looked at me, the way it ran, the sounds. I wasn't trying to tell a story. I was just trying to get it out of my head. When I got to the part about it staring at me as it ran away, I looked over at him. The firelight was dancing on his face. His eyes had gone wide. His mouth was slightly open. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't looking at me like I was crazy. He leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "Son," he said, "you saw one. You saw a Bigfoot." Hearing him say that name out loud made it real in a way that seeing it hadn't. It put a label on the impossible thing I had witnessed. It didn't make it less terrifying. It made it more so. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every rustle of the wind, every crack from the fire made me jump. I just lay there in my sleeping bag, staring at the roof of my tent, seeing that face in the green glow of my scope over and over again. I packed up at first light and drove home. I never went back to that part of the refuge again. I still hunt, but I stick to the edges, places I know, places that feel safe. That was over 3 decades ago. I've had a family, raised kids, retired from the factory. I've lived a whole life since that day, but I've never forgotten it. Not for a single day. The memory of it is burned into me. It's the feeling of being seen by something that wasn't supposed to be there. It's the sound of those rising, screaming whoops echoing through a silent winter wood. It's the knowledge deep in my gut that the woods are a lot bigger and a lot older than we think. And we're not always at the top of the food chain out there. We're just visitors. And sometimes something else is watching the visitors. Story 13. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out. I'm a pretty normal guy, 33 years old, living in Asheville, North Carolina. I've been mountain biking since I was a teenager, and I love hitting the trails alone. It's my way to clear my head. But what happened in October of 2019, I still can't shake it. I was up in Pisgah National Forest near the Blue Ridge Parkway on a solo ride. I've told a couple of close friends, but they just nod and change the subject. Maybe writing it down will help, or maybe it'll just freak me out all over again. Either way, here goes. That morning started like any other late fall day around here. It was cool, maybe in the low 50s, and super foggy. You know how it gets in the mountains. Thick, grey mist that hangs in the trees and makes everything feel quiet and still. I'd packed my usual gear, water, a protein bar, my bike tools, and a first aid kit, just in case. I parked my truck at one of the trailheads off the parkway around 7 in the morning. The sun was barely up, just a dull glow through the fog. I remember thinking it was perfect biking weather, not too cold, and the fog made it feel like I had the whole forest to myself. I started on this old fire road I'd ridden a bunch of times before. It's wide enough for a vehicle, but mostly overgrown with grass and ferns, and it cuts through some dense woods. The ground was damp from the fog, so my tires made this soft crunching sound on the gravel and wet leaves. At first, everything was peaceful. I could hear birds chirping, the occasional squirrel rustling in the underbrush, and the wind whispering through the pines. I was just coasting along, taking it easy, enjoying the solitude. My breath puffed out in little clouds, and the cold air felt good on my face. I'd been riding for maybe 45 minutes when things started to feel off. I was coming around this gentle bend in the trail where it dips down into a hollow. The fog was thicker there, clinging to the ground like a blanket, and that's when I noticed it. The silence, it wasn't gradual, it was like someone flipped a switch. One minute, there were all these little forest sounds, and the next, nothing. No birds, no squirrels, not even the wind, just dead quiet. My hair stood up on my arms and the back of my neck. I've been in the woods enough to know that when everything goes silent, something's wrong. Maybe a predator nearby, like a bear or coyote. I slowed down, my grip tightening on the handlebars, and I remember my heart starting to beat a little faster. I kept pedaling slowly, scanning the trees on either side. The fog made it hard to see more than 20 or 30 feet ahead. Then, as I rounded the bend, I saw it. Right in the middle of the trail, maybe 50 yards away, was this dark mass. At first I thought it was a fallen log or a big rock, but it was too tall and too shaped. I squinted, trying to make it out through the mist, and then my brain caught up with what I was seeing. It was a figure standing upright, and it was huge, I mean towering. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be over 7.5 feet, maybe even 8. It had broad shoulders like a football player, but way bigger, and these long arms that hung down almost to its knees. It was just standing there, motionless, partially shrouded in the fog. Its body was covered in dark, matted hair or fur. I couldn't tell which, and it seemed to blend into the shadows of the trees. I froze. My bike rolled to a stop, and I just stared. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was it a bear? But bears don't stand that straight or have those proportions. This thing was built like a person, but on a massive scale. I could feel this cold dread washing over me, from my head down to my toes. My hands were sweating inside my gloves, and I had to swallow hard because my mouth had gone dry. I remember thinking, this can't be real. This is some kind of joke. But there it was, just standing there, not moving. The silence was so heavy, it felt like pressure in my ears. Then it moved. Not much, just a slight shift, like it was adjusting its weight. And that's when the terror really hit me. It took a step forward, toward me. It wasn't rushed or aggressive at first, just deliberate. As it moved, its foot came down on a small sapling, a tree maybe 3 inches thick, and it snapped with this loud crack that echoed in the silence. The sound was so sharp and sudden I flinched. Then it let out this noise, a deep rolling growl that didn't sound like any animal I've ever heard. It was low and guttural, and it seemed to vibrate through the air, pressing against my chest like a physical force. I could feel it in my bones. Right after that, it stomped its foot, and the ground actually shook. I'm not exaggerating. I felt the vibration through my bike tires. It was like a mini earthquake. That's when my survival instincts kicked in. I didn't think, I just acted. I wrenched my bike around, almost tipping over in my panic, and started pedaling like hell back the way I came. The trail slopes downhill there, so I was gaining speed fast. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and I was breathing in ragged gasps. I could hear it behind me, not footsteps, but this crashing sound through the brush, like it was moving parallel to me through the woods. It was keeping up with me, even though I was flying down that trail. Branches were snapping, and I could hear heavy thuds, like it was knocking trees aside. The noise was getting closer, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, but the fog and trees made it hard to see anything. Then something whizzed past my head and landed with a thud near my front wheel. It was a rock, about the size of my fist. It hit the ground and bounced, sending gravel flying. My stomach dropped. This thing wasn't just following me, it was throwing things at me. I pedaled even harder, my legs burning with the effort. I was crouched low over the handlebars, trying to make myself smaller, hoping it would lose interest. But the crashing sound stayed right alongside me, maybe 20 or 30 feet to my left in the trees. I could hear its breathing now, deep, heavy pants that mixed with the growls. It sounded angry, or maybe just intent on scaring me off. I don't know how long this went on, maybe a minute or two, but it felt like an eternity. Every second I expected it to burst out of the trees and grab me. My mind was filled with images of those stories you hear about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but I'd always dismissed them as nonsense. Now I wasn't so sure. This thing felt real, and it felt dangerous. The air was cold, but I was sweating buckets under my helmet and jersey. My vision was tunneled on the trail ahead, and I was praying I wouldn't hit a root or rock and wipe out. Finally, I saw a break in the trees up ahead, the gravel track that leads back to the parking area. I pushed myself even harder, my lungs screaming for air. As I burst out onto the gravel, the crashing sound stopped, just like that. One moment, it was right there, and the next, silence again. I didn't slow down until I was a good 100 yards down the gravel. Then I risked a look back. Nothing. The woods were quiet, and the fog was still thick, hiding whatever was in there. I skidded to a stop and practically fell off my bike. My legs were so shaky I could barely stand. I leaned against my bike, hands on my knees, and vomited onto the gravel. I was soaked in sweat, shivering from the cold and the adrenaline crash. I just stood there for what felt like forever, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what happened. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely unclip my helmet. I kept staring back at the trailhead, half expecting to see that figure emerge from the trees. But nothing happened. The forest was dead quiet, like it had been before, but now it felt eerie and wrong. I eventually got myself together enough to wheel my bike back to my truck. I didn't ride, I walked, keeping my eyes on the woods the whole time. When I reached the parking lot, it was still empty. No other cars, no people. I threw my bike in the back of the truck, jumped in, and locked the doors. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the steering wheel, my heart still racing. I drove home in a daze, and when I got there, I didn't tell anyone at first. What would I say? I saw a Bigfoot in Pisgah Forest, and it chased me. They'd think I was crazy, but I know what I saw. That thing was real. It wasn't a bear or a person in a costume. The way it moved, the sounds it made, the sheer size of it. It was something else, and the way it used intimidation, like it was calculated to drive me off. That's what haunts me the most. It didn't just stumble upon me. It seemed to know what it was doing. I've never gone back to that trail, and I doubt I ever will. Sometimes when I'm biking on other trails, I'll hear a branch snap or the wind will pick up, and my heart will skip a beat. I'll never forget that day, and I'll never have an explanation for it. It just happened, and then it was over, leaving me with this gut-deep fear that I can't shake. Story 14. It was June 3rd, 2009. I remember the date because I wrote it down in my fishing log when I got home, my hands still shaking so bad I could barely hold the pen. I've lived in Oregon my whole life, spent more time in the woods than most people spend in their own backyards. I know the sounds, the smells, the way the light falls through the Douglas firs. I know what a bear looks like, what a cougar sounds like when it screams. This was neither. My buddy and I had planned this trip for a couple of weeks. We both had a rare Wednesday off, and we decided to head out to a spot we knew near the Applegate River, just outside of Klamath Falls. It wasn't some deep backcountry expedition. It was a place you could drive to, a known spot with a pull-off from the gravel road. We were just going for a lazy day, swimming, maybe some fishing if the trout were biting, just unwinding. I packed a cooler with some sandwiches and sodas. He brought his fishing gear. It was that simple. We got there around 10 in the morning. The sun was up, but the canyon the river runs through was still cool and shaded. The air smelled like damp earth and pine needles. I remember the specific sound of the car tires crunching on the gravel as we pulled off the road into this little dirt clearing. We got out, stretched, and just stood there for a minute listening to the river. It was loud, a constant white noise rush that fills up the whole valley. You have to raise your voice to be heard over it. We decided to scout out a good spot. The road was up on a bit of a bank, and to get down to the river, you had to navigate a steep, kind of crumbly hillside. It was probably a 9 or 10-foot drop to the actual riverbank. We left most of our stuff in the car for the moment, just took a couple of sodas and started looking for the best way down. My friend went off to the left, saying he thought he saw a clearer path. I wandered a little to the right, following the tree line. That's when I saw it. I was just scanning the opposite side of the river, looking at the hillside. It was steep over there, thick with young alders and ferns, and a lot of deadfall. My eyes just passed over it at first, and then they snapped back. There was a shape. It was partially hidden behind this big, moss-covered boulder and a thick patch of salmonberry brush. But it was the wrong shape. It wasn't a tree stump. It wasn't a rock. My brain tried to make it into a bear. That's the first thing you think out here. But bears don't stand like that. They're sort of hunched. Their shoulders slope. This thing was upright, solid. It was tall, I'd say between 6 and 7 feet, but it was so broad, Its shoulders were massive like a linebacker's, just this huge, powerful shelf of muscle and fur. The fur was a weird color, a sort of reddish dark brown like wet cedar bark. It was shaggy, but it looked dense, not fluffy. And then I saw its face, or rather, I saw its eyes. They were locked right on me. They weren't black like a bear's. They were this light amber brown color, like old honey, and they were intelligent. I know how that sounds, but that's the only word for it. There was an awareness in them, a focus that you don't see in an animal. It was assessing me, just standing there, perfectly still, watching me from across the river. Maybe 50, 60 yards away, my body just stopped. It was like every muscle in my chest and stomach tightened into a single hard knot. My breath caught in my throat. I felt this cold wave wash over me from my head down to my feet, and then, an instant later, a surge of heat as the adrenaline hit. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it was slamming against my ribs, a frantic pounding rhythm that I could feel in my ears. This wasn't curiosity. This was pure, undiluted terror, the kind of fear that bypasses your brain and goes straight to your lizard spine. It was the realization that it was watching me and it wasn't running. In the woods, things run from you. Deer, elk, even bears most of the time. They hear you or see you and they bolt. This thing was holding its ground. It was the hunter, and I was the thing being hunted. My mind was screaming one word over and over: run, run, run. I tore my eyes away from it for a split second, looking for my friend. I couldn't see him. The panic just exploded. I sucked in a ragged breath and I yelled his name. It wasn't a calm call. It was a strangled, high-pitched shout, ripped out of me by pure fear. Hey! I didn't wait for an answer. I didn't look back at the thing. I just turned and ran for the car. The logical part of my brain, the part that knew the safe way down the hill, was 20 feet to the left, was completely offline. All that was left was the instinct to put distance between me and that thing on the hillside. The edge of the road bank was right there. It was a straight drop down, about 9 feet onto the hard-packed dirt and rocks of the lower road. I didn't even think. I just launched myself over the edge. The drop was a blur. I landed hard, my ankles jarring, my knees buckling. I stumbled forward, my hands scraping on the gravel, but I didn't fall. I just kept my momentum going and started sprinting. I heard my friend shout something from behind me, his voice sharp with surprise and confusion. I didn't stop. I just screamed, "Car! Get to the car!" I heard his footsteps pounding behind me. I didn't look back to see if he was keeping up. I just ran. My lungs were burning. My legs felt like jelly, but the adrenaline was like a fire in my veins. The car was maybe 40 yards away. It felt like a mile. Every shadow, every rustle in the bushes at the side of the road was that thing coming for me. I fumbled with the keys in my pocket, my fingers numb and clumsy. I could hear my friend gasping for breath right behind me. I hit the unlock button on the fob, yanked the driver's side door open, and practically fell into the seat. He scrambled into the passenger side, slamming his door shut. "What the hell? What is it?" he was asking, his voice shaky. I couldn't even form the words. I just jammed the key into the ignition, my hand trembling so violently I missed the slot twice. The engine roared to life. I threw it into drive and stomped on the gas. The tires spun on the gravel, spitting rocks and dirt, and then we fishtailed onto the road. I didn't care about the direction. I just knew we had to go away from that river. I drove fast, too fast for a gravel forest service road. The car was sliding around corners, bouncing over potholes. Neither of us spoke for what felt like a long time. The only sounds were the roar of the engine, the crunch of gravel under the tires, and our own ragged breathing. I had a death grip on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see some huge dark shape loping after us down the road. There was nothing, just a cloud of our own dust. After a few minutes, my friend finally found his voice. "Was it a bear?" he asked, his tone hesitant. I shook my head, my eyes still glued to the road ahead. No, I managed to say. My throat was tight. It wasn't a bear. What was it then? I just shook my head again. I couldn't say it. Saying it out loud would make it real in a way that seeing it hadn't. We drove in silence again until we hit the paved county road. I didn't slow down until we were out of the woods completely, until we were passing farmhouses and fields, places where the trees were just decorative lines on property boundaries. We eventually pulled over at a gas station in the next town over. I turned off the car, and the sudden silence was deafening. My whole body was trembling. I looked at my hands. They were still shaking. My friend was just staring straight ahead, his face pale. "I saw it," I said quietly. The words felt foreign. Up on the hill, across the river. He turned to look at me. Saw what? I described it. The height, the build, the shoulders, the reddish-brown fur, the eyes. I told him how it was just standing there watching me, not moving, just watching. When I mentioned the eyes, he got quiet. Then he said, "It looked like the Patterson thing, didn't it? The one from the film." And that was it. That was the confirmation. I'd seen the Patterson Gimlin footage a dozen times. Everyone who's into this stuff has. And what I saw, it was that. It was Patty. The walk, the proportions, the sheer mass of it. It wasn't a guy in a suit. It was a living, breathing animal. A predator that saw me and decided to let me go. We sat there for a long time, not saying much. We just cut the trip short and went home. I dropped him off, and I didn't stop driving until I was inside my own garage with the door shut behind me. I've never gone back to that spot. Not once. I hear things, you know? Local tales, old-timers talking about things that live deep in the canyons, things that are territorial, that don't like being watched. I used to think they were just stories, campfire tales to scare kids. I don't think that anymore. The thing that haunts me, the part that I still lie awake thinking about sometimes, isn't just what I saw. It's the feeling, the raw, primal fear of being stalked, of being the prey. I've been in the woods my whole life, and I've never felt that before. I've never felt so completely, utterly out of my element. That thing was in its home, and I was an intruder. It made eye contact with me, and in that look, I felt a power and an intelligence that I cannot explain. It let me live. I don't know why. I just know that for one long, terrifying moment on the banks of the Applegate River, I was absolutely certain that I was about to die, and that something I wasn't supposed to see was the last thing I would ever see. And then I ran, and it let me. I still don't know what to make of that. I probably never will. Story 15 about It was the third morning of our Nicaragua vacation, and I'd just finished my first lap along the jungle trail that looped behind the resort. The air was already thick and wet, the kind of humidity that feels like a warm towel wrapped around your face. My wife was still asleep back in the cabana, the kind of deep, peaceful sleep you only get on a real vacation, and I didn't want to wake her. I'd promised myself I'd keep up my running even here, so I'd slipped out just after sunrise, when the light was still soft and golden. This trail was something else. The resort owner had pointed it out on a hand-drawn map when we checked in, calling it a nature path. It was more than that. It wound its way up a gentle slope, with the sound of a nearby waterfall, a constant low roar in the background. The trees were so dense, they knitted a canopy overhead, turning the path into a green tunnel. The ground was a mix of dark soil and tangled roots, and the air smelled of damp earth, rotting leaves, and something sweet I couldn't name. I'd done one lap already, just getting a feel for it, and it was beautiful, isolated, but beautiful. I turned around at the small wooden marker that signaled the end of the loop and started my second lap. My legs felt good, my breathing was steady. I remember thinking how lucky we were to be here, away from the emails and the traffic and the constant noise of life back home. This was pure, unfiltered nature. For the first few minutes of the second lap, everything was the same as before. The crunch of my shoes on the path, the chatter of unseen birds, the mist from the waterfall cooling my skin. Then I heard it. It wasn't a branch snapping. It was more like a steady, rhythmic rustling, keeping pace with me, but off in the trees to my left. I glanced over, thinking it was maybe a monkey or a coatimundi, something the guidebooks said lived out here. The foliage was a solid wall of green, but the sound was moving right along with me. I picked up my pace a little, my heart doing a corresponding thump, thump, thump in my chest. It was probably nothing, just an animal, but it was matching my speed. I looked again, squinting into the shadows between the trunks, and that's when I saw it. It was maybe 40, 50 feet away, moving through the trees with an impossible ease. It was hairy, covered in what looked like shaggy, dark brown fur, but it wasn't a monkey. Its body was lanky, like a teenager who'd just had a growth spurt, all arms and legs. It was running on 2 legs, its gait a little clumsy but fast, so fast. Then, without breaking stride, it dropped forward onto its knuckles and moved on all 4s, its back straight, like a gorilla but different, lankier, more fluid. My brain just froze. I didn't scream. I didn't stop running. It was like some primal part of me took over, and the only command was, run. I kicked into a full sprint. I'm not a fast runner, but in that moment, with pure adrenaline flooding my system, I felt like I was flying. The path was a blur beneath my feet, and it kept up. It wasn't chasing me. That was the weirdest part. It wasn't lunging or growling, it was just pacing me. It would pop into a clear spot between 2 trees, its long limbs swinging, and then vanish back into the green, only to reappear a few seconds later, further ahead. Its face, what I could see of it, wasn't snarling. It had dark, intelligent eyes, and for a split second I swear it looked right at me, and there was a glint there, not malice. It looked playful, curious, like a kid seeing something new and interesting. This went on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 150 yards. My lungs were burning, my legs screaming. I could hear my own ragged breaths and the thud of my feet, and underneath it all, the steady, crashing movement of this thing as it effortlessly kept pace with my desperate, all-out sprint. I was terrified, but it was a confused terror. It wasn't acting like a predator. It was like it was playing a game. Then the world exploded. From deep, deep within the jungle, a roar tore through the air. It wasn't like any sound I have ever heard. It wasn't a lion or a bear. It was lower, louder, a guttural, roaring yell that vibrated in my chest and seemed to shake the very leaves on the trees. It was a sound of pure, ancient power, and it was filled with an unmistakable tone of absolute authority. It was the kind of yell a furious father would make. The effect on the creature was instantaneous. It stopped dead. It had been in mid-stride, one long arm reaching for the next tree, and it just froze. Its head whipped around toward the source of the sound, and its eyes went wide. Not just wide, they were huge, white-rimmed circles of pure, unadulterated fear. It looked, for all the world, exactly like a child who's just been caught doing something very, very bad. In that frozen second, our eyes met again. The playfulness was gone, replaced by a frantic animal panic. Then it turned and fled. It didn't just run away from me. It scrambled, it crashed, it tore through the undergrowth in the opposite direction, back the way we had come, moving faster than I thought anything could move. It was gone in 2 heartbeats, the sound of its flight swallowed by the jungle. I stood there, rooted to the spot. The roar still seemed to hang in the air, a physical pressure against my eardrums. My heart wasn't just pounding, it was trying to beat its way out of my rib cage. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. The sweat on my skin was suddenly ice cold. That roar had changed everything. The playful creature was one thing. The thing that made that sound was something else entirely. It was a reminder, a cold, hard slap in the face, that I was not at the top of any food chain out here. I didn't wait, I didn't look around, I just ran. I ran back down the trail, my legs feeling like rubber, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. I didn't look into the trees, I just stared at the path ahead, my only thought to get back to the cabana, to my wife, to walls and a locked door. The beauty of the jungle was gone, replaced by a feeling of being watched, of being surrounded by something I couldn't see or understand. I burst out of the tree line and into the resort's garden area, stumbling to a halt, bent over with my hands on my knees, trying to vomit, but nothing coming up. I must have looked a sight, pale and drenched in sweat, my eyes probably wild. The resort owner, an older local man named Carlos, who was always puttering around the flower beds in the morning, saw me and walked over, his expression concerned. "Senor, you are okay. You see a snake." I straightened up, still trying to catch my breath. The words tumbled out of me in a jumble. I told him about the trail, the creature, the roar. I described the lanky, hairy thing and how it ran. I was babbling, my voice shaky. He listened quietly, his face neutral. When I finished, he just nodded slowly and wiped his hands on his trousers. "Ah," he said, his voice calm. "You saw Luke." I just stared at him. "Luke?" "See, the young one. He is curious. He likes to watch the runners. He is harmless." He said it with the same casual tone someone might use to talk about a neighbor's mischievous dog. My mind was reeling. Harmless? It was huge. And that sound, what was that sound? Carlos's expression grew a little more serious. He looked past me toward the jungle. "That," he said, "was the father. He's not so curious. He's not so harmless. He does not like Luke to come so close to our place." He tapped the side of his nose. "He is the one who makes the rules. He told me to relax, to have some breakfast, that I was safe here at the resort. He said Luke had been around for years, that he was almost like a local legend, but he never, ever went back up the trail himself after dark. He said it like it was the most normal thing in the world, that there was a family of giant, hairy hominids living in the jungle behind his hotel, and that you just had to know which one was the friendly one." I went back to the cabana. My wife was just waking up. She asked me how my run was. I looked at her sleepy, smiling face, and I just said, "Good." It was good. I didn't tell her. What would I have said? I took a shower, the hot water stinging my skin, and I could still feel the vibration of that roar in my bones. We spent the rest of the vacation by the pool, on the beach, in the town. I never set foot on that jungle trail again. I'd look at it from the safety of the resort patio, that green, inviting entrance, and a cold knot would form in my stomach. I didn't feel like I was in danger, not really. Not from Luke, anyway. The encounter itself was more bewildering than truly threatening. But that roar changed everything. It was a sound from another world, a sound that didn't belong in my modern, understood life. It was a reminder that there are still places on this earth where the maps are wrong, where the things we call myths walk around in the daylight, and where a father's yell can silence the jungle. It left me with a deep, lasting unease, a feeling I still can't quite shake. It's not a fear of being attacked. It's the unsettling knowledge that we share this world with things we cannot explain, forces we never see, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the curtain gets pulled back for a second, and you're left standing there, breathless and small, with a memory that doesn't fit anywhere in your head. I went for a jog one morning in Nicaragua, and I learned that the world is much, much bigger and much stranger than I ever thought, and I have no idea what to do with that. Story 16. It was one of those days that starts so normal, you don't even think about it. The kind of day that just bleeds into all the others, until something happens that carves it out of your memory forever. This was back in the late 60s, deer season in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The air was so cold, it felt like it was pinching the inside of your nose with every breath. My brothers and I were up near Iron River and Crystal Falls on our step-uncle's property. He had a big chunk of land, hundreds of acres, a lot of it dense woods and swamps, all fenced in with barbed wire to keep his cattle in, or maybe to keep other things out. I don't know. Thinking about it now, maybe he knew something. We were driving deer. That's what we called it. A couple of us would post up on stands at the end of a section of woods, and the rest would walk through, making noise, trying to push any deer out towards the guys with the rifles. I was a walker that day. Me and my middle brother, Mike. We were the drivers. Our oldest brother, Carl, he was on a stand to the north. The woods were quiet in that heavy way they get in winter. All the little sounds are swallowed up by the snow. Your own footsteps are loud. The crunch of your boots breaking through the crust, your own breathing sounding like a bellows in your ears. The trees were mostly bare, just these grey skeletons clawing at a sky the colour of dirty dishwater. It wasn't snowing, but it felt like it wanted to, like the whole world was holding its breath. Mike and I started from the southern fence line, just walking and talking low, not really expecting much. We'd smack the trunks of trees with sticks every now and then, a sharp crack that would echo and then get eaten by the silence. We'd been at it for maybe an hour, working our way slowly north, when we heard it, not from in front of us, but from off to the east, a crashing sound. Not the light, skittering run of a deer. This was heavier, a lot heavier. We both stopped dead, just looked at each other, our breath plumed out in front of our faces. "What the hell was that?" Mike whispered. I just shook my head. We stood there for a full minute listening, but there was nothing, just that deep waiting silence again. It felt wrong. The woods are never that quiet. There's always a squirrel chattering, a bird, something, but there was nothing. It was like everything living had just decided to shut up. We started walking again, but slower now, and we weren't talking anymore. The feeling in the air had changed. It's hard to describe, but it's a feeling you get sometimes in the deep woods, a primal itch at the back of your neck that says you're not at the top of the food chain out here. I remember feeling that itch, and I remember ignoring it, telling myself I was just being jumpy. We kept going, and after another 20 minutes or so, we finally pushed something, 2 whitetail bucks, big ones, their coats thick and grey against the snow. They burst out of a thicket about 50 yards ahead of us, not running from us, but angling away, sprinting like all the demons of hell were on their tails. They didn't even look our way. They just ran north, their white tails flashing like flags as they disappeared into the trees. We whooped, a short, sharp sound, thinking we'd done our job, and pushed them right towards Carl. That's when we heard the other sound. It wasn't a crash this time. It was a thump. A single, solid, powerful thump that you felt in your chest as much as you heard with your ears. It came from the same direction the deer had run from. It was the sound of something very, very heavy landing on the ground. Mike's face went slack. He looked at me, and his eyes were wide. "Did you hear that?" he said, his voice tight. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound calm. Probably just a tree limb breaking under the snow. Even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. That wasn't the sound of wood snapping. It was the sound of mass, pure, dense mass hitting the earth. We didn't say anything else. We just started heading north towards where we were supposed to meet up with Carl. The plan was to all regroup at his stand. The walk felt longer than it should have. The woods felt like they were closing in. That feeling on the back of my neck was screaming now. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees, but I didn't see anything. It was what I didn't see that got to me. No animal tracks, no birds, nothing. We finally broke into the small clearing where Carl had his stand set up. He was already climbing down from his perch, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He saw us and started walking towards us, but his walk was off. He wasn't striding, he was almost shuffling, and his face, I'll never forget his face. He was pale, I mean paper white, like all the blood had just decided to leave his body. His eyes were so wide I could see the white all around the irises. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost or something worse. Mike got to him first. "You get a shot." We pushed two big ones right towards you. Carl just shook his head. He wasn't looking at Mike. He was looking past him, back into the woods we'd just come from. His hands were shaking. "Carl," I said, stepping closer. "You okay, man? You look like hell." He finally turned his eyes to me, and there was a raw, naked fear in them that I had never seen in my older brother before. Carl was the tough one, the one who never got scared of anything. "I saw it," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, cracked. "Saw what?" Mike asked, his voice impatient. "The deer. Did you miss?" "No," Carl said, and he shook his head again, a slow, disbelieving movement. "Not the deer. I saw an abominable snowman." Mike and I just stared at him. The words didn't make any sense. They were like something from a comic book. An abominable snowman, here in the UP of Michigan. "What are you talking about?" I said, a laugh trying to bubble up in my throat. But it died when I saw he was dead serious. He wasn't joking. He wasn't playing a prank. The man was terrified. "It came out of the trees after the deer," he said, his words starting to tumble out faster now, like he had to get them out. "It was huge. I mean, Jesus, it had to be 8 feet tall if it was an inch, covered in dark hair like a bear, but it wasn't a bear. It walked on 2 legs. It walked just like a man." He pointed a trembling finger towards the northern fence line, about 100 yards away. It came out right there. The deer were already past the fence, gone. This thing, it came to the fence. Our uncle's fence, you know it. 5 strands of barbed wire, tight as a guitar string. I nodded. I knew the fence. It was a serious fence, built to stop a bull. "This thing," Carl said, his voice dropping back to a whisper, "it didn't even break stride. It just stepped over it." Mike snorted. "Come on, Carl. Nobody can step over that fence." "That's what I'm telling you." Carl's voice rose, almost a shout. "It did. It put 1 foot over, like the wires were only knee-high, and then the other foot, smooth as you please. It didn't slow down. It didn't even look at the fence. It was like it wasn't even there. Then it just moved off into the snow after those deer. It didn't run. It just loped. It was so damn fast." The 3 of us stood there in that cold clearing, the silence pressing in on us. Mike looked skeptical. I felt a weird mix of things. Concern for my brother, a creeping unease, and a stubborn refusal to believe what he was saying. "Are you sure it wasn't just a big moose or a bear walking on its hind legs?" I asked, trying to find a rational explanation. "It was not a moose," Carl snapped, "and it wasn't a bear. I know what a bear looks like. It was built like a man, but massive, shoulders like a damn ox, and the way it moved, it was powerful. Graceful, even. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever seen in my life." He was starting to shake all over now, a fine tremor. The cold wasn't doing that. This was pure adrenaline, pure fear. Okay, I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Let's just go take a look. Show us where." He didn't want to. I could see it in his eyes. He wanted to get in the truck and drive away and never come back. But Mike and I started walking towards the fence, and after a moment Carl followed, lagging behind us. We got to the fence line. The snow was deep there, maybe 2 feet, untouched, except for the tracks. And there were tracks. The deer tracks were clear, sharp hoof prints heading north. And then right where Carl had pointed, there was another set. They were huge. I mean, I have big feet. I wear a size 12 boot. And these prints made mine look like a child's. They had to be 18, maybe 20 inches long. They were shaped like a human foot, but wider, much wider. You could see the impressions of 5 toes, but they weren't distinct like a bare human foot. They were kind of blurred, like the foot was covered in thick, matted hair, and they led right up to the fence. On our side, the tracks were deep, the snow packed down hard. Then, on the other side of the fence, the tracks started again, about 4 feet away. There was no disturbance in the snow directly under the wires, no broken strands, no blood. Nothing. It was exactly as Carl had said. Something had simply stepped over the 5-foot fence as if it were a minor inconvenience. Mike, who had been so skeptical, just stared at the tracks. He crouched down, not touching them, just looking. His face had lost its mocking expression. He looked confused and then worried. "Holy crap," he muttered. I walked a few paces along the fence, following the tracks on our side. They came out of the thick woods to the east. And then I saw something else. Between two of the giant footprints, pressed deep into the snow, was a perfect, clear deer hoof print. It was right on top of the giant print. The deer had run past first. This thing had come after. It was following them. A cold that had nothing to do with the winter air seeped into my bones. I looked back at Carl. He was standing by the fence, his arms wrapped around himself, staring at the tracks on the other side. He looked small. He looked like a little kid who'd just had his whole world turned upside down. We didn't say much after that. We just got back to the truck, a beat-up old Ford, and got in. The heater blasted cold air at first, and we all just sat there shivering, waiting for it to warm up. Nobody turned on the radio. The only sound was the engine and our breathing. I kept looking out the window at the woods as we drove away. The grey trees, the white snow. It all looked the same as it had that morning, but it wasn't. It felt different. It felt watched. It felt like that thing was still out there, moving through the silent trees, and it knew we had been there too. We never talked about it much after that day. Mike and I, we'd mention it once in a great while, usually after a few beers, but we'd always drop it quickly. It was too weird, too uncomfortable. Carl never brought it up. Not once. But I saw the look in his eyes whenever we went back up to the UP. He was always on edge, always scanning the tree line. That raw fear never really left him. For years, I convinced myself it was just a bear, a big, weird-looking bear that walked funny. I dismissed the tracks. I told myself the snow had melted and distorted them, made them look bigger than they were. It was easier that way. It let me sleep at night. But now, decades later, I can't dismiss it anymore. My brother is gone now, passed away a few years back. And the older I get, the more that day comes back to me, the look on his face, the sheer, absolute certainty in his voice when he described it. He wasn't a liar. He wasn't prone to flights of fancy. He saw what he saw. And I can't shake the feeling that I failed him that day. I failed him by not believing him, by not taking his terror seriously. I just wanted to get back to the warm truck and pretend it never happened. I regret that. I regret not following those tracks. I regret not trying to find out what it was that could step over a 5-strand barbed wire fence like it was nothing. He called it an abominable snowman. Today, people would call it a Bigfoot. I don't know what it was. I only know that it was real. It was out there in that wild, remote country, and my brother saw it. And for one cold, silent afternoon in the late 60s, so did I, even if I was too stubborn to admit it at the time. The memory of those giant tracks in the snow and the sheer impossible space between them on either side of that fence is something that haunts me to this day. I just don't know. I really don't. Story 17. It was the mid-2000s. I don't remember the exact year, just that it was somewhere in the middle of that decade. I was section hiking in Massachusetts, and I'd planned to spend the night at the Tom Leonard Shelter in the East Mountain State Forest. It was a solo trip, which wasn't unusual for me. I liked the solitude. The shelter was one of those basic 3-sided lean-tos, tucked back in the woods a bit off the main trail. It was a nice spot, peaceful, with a stream nearby for water. I got there in the late afternoon, set up my sleeping bag, filtered some water, the usual routine. Now, I'd heard some stories about this area, not anything major, just whispers from other hikers about weird sounds, possible Bigfoot sightings, that kind of lore. I've always been a skeptic, but I'm also curious. So that evening, As the sun was starting to go down and the light was getting that deep golden quality, I thought, what the hell? Why not? I decided to try calling out. Not like I was expecting anything to answer, you know? It was more of a joke, something to pass the time. I started off just making noise, singing a little. Then I tried some whoop calls. Those long, loud calls you hear in those Bigfoot documentaries. I did a few wood knocks too, banging a sturdy stick against a tree trunk. It felt silly, honestly. The forest was quiet, just the usual evening sounds, crickets starting up, a few birds. Nothing answered. No response at all. I remember feeling a little disappointed, but also relieved, because what would I have done if something had actually answered? I laughed it off, made my dinner, and settled in for the night. I fell asleep pretty easily. The air was cool, not cold, and I was tired from the day's hike. My sleep was deep at first, the kind where you don't dream, you're just gone. But then something pulled me out of it. It wasn't a slow waking up, it was a jolt, like when you're falling in a dream and you hit the ground in real life. My eyes snapped open and I was instantly awake. The inside of the shelter was pitch black. I mean, couldn't see my hand in front of my face, black. I fumbled for my watch, pressed the light button. It was 2:30 in the morning, and then it happened, a single sharp crack. Not a branch snapping that I'm used to. This was different. It was a solid, heavy thwack, like someone had taken a giant sledgehammer to a thick tree trunk. It came from maybe 50, 60 yards away, off to the left of the shelter. The sound was so dense, so purposeful, it sucked all the other noise out of the forest. The crickets stopped. Everything stopped. My heart just froze in my chest. I stopped breathing. I was lying there, rigid, listening so hard my ears started to ring with the silence. And then, immediately after the knock, there was another sound, a groaning, cracking noise that built up fast, and then a huge, heavy, abrupt thud. A tree, a whole goddamn tree was falling. I could hear the rush of leaves and branches as it came down, and the impact was massive, a deep thump that I felt through the ground. It wasn't a slow, graceful fall. It was violent. It sounded like it had been shoved over, pushed. The silence that came after was worse than the sounds. It was thick, heavy, oppressive. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, like something was out there, standing in the darkness, waiting. I didn't move a muscle. It was on my back, my sleeping bag pulled up to my chin, and I just stared into the blackness of the shelter roof. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a logical explanation. A bear? No, bears don't knock on trees like that, and they sure as hell don't push over full-size trees. A falling branch? That was no branch, that was a tree, a big one. Wind? There was no wind. The air was perfectly still. This is the part that people don't get unless they've been in a situation like this. It's not just the fear of the unknown, it's the physical sensation of it. My skin was crawling, like 1,000 ants were marching up and down my arms and legs. My scalp was tight. My mouth was so dry, it felt like it was full of cotton. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, a fast, frantic drumbeat. I was cold, but I was also sweating, a clammy, cold sweat that made my t-shirt stick to my back. I had to move. I had to be ready. I slowly, so slowly, it felt like it took an hour, shifted my weight. Every tiny rustle of my sleeping bag sounded like a thunderclap in that silence. I reached out, my fingers searching the wooden platform of the shelter floor until they brushed against the cool, hard plastic of my flashlight. My other hand found my boots, which I'd placed right next to my sleeping pad. I didn't sit up. I just held onto them, my fingers gripping the laces. My plan, if you could call it a plan, was to get my boots on and get the hell out of there if I heard anything else. But where would I go? It was the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere. The trail was a ribbon of darkness. The shelter felt like a trap. so I just lay there, listening. My eyes were wide open, straining to see anything in the dark. I'd look towards the opening of the shelter, and my brain would start playing tricks on me. I'd see shapes in the shadows between the trees, big, hulking shapes that would disappear when I blinked. I was too scared to turn on the flashlight. Turning it on felt like announcing my location. I'm here. Come and get me. The minutes dragged on. 5 minutes, 10. I was hyper-aware of every single sound my body made, the rustle of my bag, the sound of my own swallowing, which was loud and difficult with my dry throat. I was waiting for another knock or footsteps, heavy bipedal footsteps coming closer. That was the worst part, the anticipation, the knowing that something was out there and that it knew I was in here. My mind kept going back to the wood knocks I'd done at dusk. It felt like a lifetime ago. Was this an answer? Was this a response to my stupid, childish game? The thought made me feel sick to my stomach. If it was, then I had invited this. I had brought this attention on myself. After what felt like an eternity, maybe half an hour, the forest started to come back to life. It was hesitant at first. A single cricket started chirping, then another. It was the most relieving sound I'd ever heard. The oppressive silence began to lift, just a little. The tension in my body started to ease, not gone, but lessened. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me feeling drained and exhausted. My grip on my flashlight and boots loosened. My eyes felt heavy. I didn't want to sleep. My body was just giving out. I fought it for a while, my head jerking up every time I started to drift off. But eventually, the exhaustion won. I fell back into a shallow, fitful sleep, my dreams filled with the sound of cracking wood and dark, watching shapes. I woke up with the first grey light of dawn. It was quiet, normal quiet. Birds were singing. I sat up slowly, my body stiff and aching from lying tense all night. My first thought was to look towards where the sounds had come from. From the shelter opening, I could see a dense thicket of trees. There was no obvious gap, no clear sign of a fallen tree. I pulled on my boots, my hands shaking as I tied the laces. I grabbed my hiking pole and my flashlight, even though it was now morning, and stepped out of the shelter. The air was fresh and cool. It felt normal. It looked normal. I walked in the direction of the knock and the crash, pushing through some low brush, my heart starting to hammer again. I was expecting to see a massive tree trunk lying on its side, a huge scar in the forest floor. There was nothing. I mean, there were trees, lots of them. I walked a grid pattern back and forth, searching the ground, looking up at the canopy. I looked for broken branches, disturbed soil, anything. I couldn't find a single thing out of place. No freshly fallen tree, no massive trunk, no pile of splintered wood. Nothing. It was like it had never happened. The forest was perfectly, unnervingly calm. That was almost worse than hearing it in the first place. If I'd found a tree, I could have maybe convinced myself it was a freak accident, a deadfall that just happened to coincide with my stupid experiment. But there was no tree. There was no evidence at all. Just my memory of that solid, intentional knock and the violent, earth-shaking thud that followed. I packed up my gear faster than I ever have. I didn't eat breakfast. I just stuffed everything into my pack, shouldered it, and got back on the trail, walking fast, almost at a jog. I didn't look back. I just wanted to put distance between me and that shelter. I've replayed that night in my head 1,000 times since then. I've tried to rationalize it. Was I dreaming? No, I was awake. I was so awake it hurt. Was it some kind of ultra-rare natural event? I don't know what that would be. The sequence was just too perfect, too responsive. A knock, then a tree pushed over, then silence. It felt like a message, a display of power. I've spent years on the trail, and I've never had another experience like that. I've heard things, seen things I can't explain, but nothing that left me with that specific, deep-seated feeling of dread. The feeling that I was not alone, and that whatever was out there with me was immensely powerful, and it knew I was there, it knew I was listening, and it wanted me to know it was there too. I never went back to that shelter. I don't think I ever will. Story 18. It was one of those sticky mid-August evenings up here in the Upper Peninsula, the kind where the humidity clings to you like a second skin, and the mosquitoes are thick enough to qualify as a biblical plague. My boyfriend, I'll just call him Jay since he's a pretty private guy, was heading out to check his beaver traps. This wasn't unusual, it's what he does. He's a trapper, has been since he was a kid, and he knows these woods south of Wakefield better than he knows the layout of our own kitchen. Cheney Lake Road is just a dirt track, really, all washboard and potholes, winding through a swampy, dense patch of forest that feels a million miles from anywhere. He was driving his old pickup truck, creeping along at maybe 10 miles an hour, just idling, really, his eyes scanning the ditches. The light was starting to go, that long, golden late summer light that throws everything into sharp relief, but leaves the shadows deep and black as ink. He remembers the dust kicking up behind the truck, the familiar rattle of the suspension, the smell of hot pine and damp earth coming through the open window. That's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was a black bear. You see them all the time, especially around dusk. They'll amble out onto the road, give you a look, and then shuffle off. But this was different. It was down on all fours in the middle of the road, about 100 yards ahead. It was just a shape, a solid black shape, darker than any shadow around it. He kept rolling forward, slowing even more, expecting it to bolt. It didn't bolt. As he got closer, maybe 50 yards now, the thing just stood up. It unfolded itself. That's the only way he can describe it. It went from being a low, hunched-over shape to rising straight up onto two legs, like a man would. But it wasn't a man. It was massive. The sheer size of it is what hit him first. It was tall, impossibly tall. It turned its body, just its upper body, and looked right at him. He said, time just stopped. The truck was still rolling forward, but everything else froze. He was close enough then, maybe 30 yards, to see it clearly. Its body was covered in what looked like shaggy black hair, matted and thick. It didn't have the sloping back of a bear. Its shoulders were huge and square. And its face, he says he'll never forget its face. It wasn't an ape face, and it wasn't a man's face. It was just dark, with deep-set eyes that caught the last of the light. They weren't glowing or anything spooky like that. They were just dark, intelligent-looking eyes. It held his gaze. For 2 seconds, he counted them in his head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. That's all it was. But in that span, a whole lifetime of knowing the woods, of feeling safe in them, just evaporated. Then, it turned away from him, back toward the swamp on the driver's side of the road, and it started to walk. It didn't run. It didn't lurch or shamble. It walked. It took these long, fluid, powerful strides, covering ground in a way that didn't seem possible. It was graceful, he said, which made it even more terrifying. It moved with a purpose that was utterly alien, and it was headed for a yellow curve warning sign he passes every time he's out there. He knows that sign. He's looked at it 1,000 times. It's one of those big ones, 10 feet tall, mounted on a metal post. As this thing walked past the sign, its head was level with the top of it. His brain just short-circuited, a 10-foot-tall curve sign. This thing's head was right there. It was 9 feet tall at least, maybe more. It was just immense. It reached the tree line and then it was gone. Just like that. 1 second it was there, this colossal black figure stepping into the wall of tag alders and spruce, and the next second there was nothing. No crashing, no sound of branches breaking, no squelching in the swamp mud. Nothing. Absolute silence. It vanished like it had never been there at all. He's not a guy who spooks easy. He's spent more nights alone in the woods than most people have spent in their own beds. He's had standoffs with moose, stumbled on bear cubs with their mama close by, all the normal Northwood stuff. But this was different. This was a fundamental wrongness. He told me later that the silence was the worst part. Something that big, moving that fast into that thick of a swamp, should have made a racket. It should have sounded like a train wreck. The fact that it didn't made his skin crawl. He brought the truck to a complete stop, right where the thing had been standing. His hands were shaking so bad he had to grip the steering wheel to steady them. He could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. He just sat there for a minute, maybe two, trying to process what he'd just seen. His mind was racing, trying to fit it into a box, a bear, a person in a ghillie suit, a weird trick of the light. But the box kept breaking. The scale was all wrong. The way it moved was all wrong. He's a practical man, a trapper. His whole life is about reading sign, about understanding animals. So despite the fear that was turning his blood to ice water, he put the truck in park and got out. The air was dead still. The mosquitoes, which are usually a constant buzzing nuisance, were gone. It was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, oppressive quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's pressing in on your eardrums. He walked to the spot in the road where he'd first seen it on all fours. The gravel was disturbed, but that could have been from anything. He looked toward the swamp where it had disappeared. He started searching the edge of the tree line, his eyes scanning the ground, the bushes, everything. He was looking for tracks, for broken branches, for any piece of evidence that would make sense of what he'd seen. The ground was soft and damp, right at the road's edge, perfect for holding a print. He found nothing. There were no tracks, not a single depression in the mud. The ferns and skunk cabbage at the swamp's edge were undisturbed. It was as if the thing had simply dissolved into the air. He pushed a little further in, his boots sinking into the muck. The smell of decay and stagnant water was thick. He looked up into the canopy, half expecting to see it looking down at him, but there was only the dark green of the spruce boughs. That's when the feeling hit him, the feeling of being watched. It wasn't his imagination, it was a primal, physical sensation. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead, despite the evening's heat. He suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable, like a mouse that knows a hawk is circling overhead. He was a big guy, 6'2" and solid, used to being the apex predator out here. In that moment, he felt small, prey. He backed out of the swamp, his eyes never leaving the dark wall of trees. He didn't turn his back on it until he was at the truck door. He fumbled with the handle, his fingers still clumsy with adrenaline, and practically threw himself into the driver's seat. He slammed the door and hit the lock, a useless city dweller gesture that felt pathetic out here, but he did it anyway. He just sat there for a long time, staring at that empty stretch of swamp, the engine still off, listening to the absolute silence. Eventually, the normal night sounds started to trickle back in. A frog croaked somewhere. A few mosquitoes found their way back to his window screen. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It lingered, a heavy weight on his shoulders. He finally started the truck, the engine roaring unnaturally loud in the quiet. He turned it around, the tires spinning a little in the loose gravel, and he drove home. He didn't check the rest of his traps. He didn't even think about them. He just drove, his knuckles white on the wheel, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see that massive black shape loping after him down the road. When he got back to the house, I knew something was wrong the second he walked in. His face was pale, drained of all color. He had this wild, haunted look in his eyes that I'd never seen before. He went straight to the sink and poured himself a glass of water, but his hand was shaking so much he could barely drink it. He told me the whole story right then, sitting at the kitchen table, the words tumbling out of him. He wasn't trying to tell a scary story. He was trying to make sense of it, to offload this impossible thing he'd seen onto someone else, hoping I could explain it away, but I couldn't. Hearing it from him, seeing the genuine, deep-seated fear in this man who's never been afraid of anything in the woods, it chilled me to the bone. The thing that really got me, the detail that sealed it for me, was when he described the way it looked at him. He said it wasn't a vacant animal stare. It was a look of assessment, a look of recognition. It saw him, it registered what he was, and it made a decision to just walk away. That intelligence, that calm, deliberate action is what scared him the most. An animal acts on instinct. This thing, it seemed to be thinking. That was the real turning point. The next day he went into town and bought a pistol, a serious one. He got a holster for it, and now it's with him every single time he steps off the porch. He never used to carry. He always said he knew the woods, knew how to handle himself, that a gun was just extra weight, not anymore. He still goes out on Cheney Lake Road. It's his trap line. It's his livelihood, but he doesn't go slowly anymore. He drives a little faster. He doesn't roll the window all the way down, and his eyes are never just on the ditches anymore. They're constantly scanning the deep shadows between the trees, looking for a patch of darkness that's a little too solid, a little too tall. He's a different man in the woods now. The fearlessness is gone, replaced by a sharp, constant vigilance. He doesn't talk about it much anymore, but sometimes I'll catch him just staring out the window towards the south, towards Cheney Lake, with a distant, unsettled look on his face. He saw something out there that doesn't fit into his world. Something that rewrote the rules of the forest he thought he knew, and the truly terrifying part, the part that keeps him up some nights, is the knowledge that it's still out there, and it knows he's there too.